When a thought is observed, what watches the watcher? A thought emerges without warning, like mist rising from still water. One moment the surface is smooth, untouched. The next, a ripple disturbs the silence. That ripple is a thought, sudden yet familiar, uninvited yet known. Attention leans forward to greet it, the mind like a hand reaching into the fog. But something curious happens the moment the thought is seen. It changes. It no longer drifts freely. It becomes an object, a phenomenon being noticed. Observation has shaped it, like wind shaping the mist. And in that moment of seeing, the question arises, what is doing the watching? Awareness stands behind the thought like a figure behind a veil. The veil is thin, almost transparent, but never fully gone. Watching the thought is not the same as being the thought. There is a distance, subtle but unmistakable, as if two dimensions exist in tandem, the thinker and the thought, the screen and the image. That distance is the space where the watcher resides. But if the watcher observes the thought, then what observes the watcher? The idea loops backward like a hall of mirrors, each layer reflecting the next. Look closer, and the watcher becomes an object of thought itself. That which observes can also be observed. One layer peels back to reveal another. A sense of infinite regress begins, the sensation of falling into the self with no bottom to land on. Consider the mind as a theater. On the stage, thoughts play out like actors performing a script, written by memory, emotion, habit, and perception. In the audience sits awareness, watching the play unfold. But who is the audience? What makes up that invisible observer sitting silently in the dark, witnessing it all without moving? Turn to face it, and the theater dissolves. The watcher cannot be held. It escapes the grasp the moment it is sought. It is not a thing, not a form. It is the presence of seeing itself. This raises the unsettling possibility. Perhaps there is no watcher, only the illusion of watching. Perhaps observation is just another thought, pretending to be apart from the others. Perhaps the mind tricks itself, creating a loop of self-awareness that feels deeper than it truly is. Yet even this thought, the idea of illusion, must itself be seen. And so the watcher returns, not as a character, but as the space in which all characters appear. Language struggles here. Every attempt to name the watcher places it in the realm of things. Yet the watcher is not a thing. It cannot be described, only felt, or, more precisely, noticed in the act of noticing. Like a mirror reflecting another mirror, the loop extends into infinity, with no image at the center. Just layers of reflection, looping back, reflecting again, until silence takes over. In this silence, the mind begins to rest. The chase to find the watcher slows. The thoughts continue, like birds flying across an open sky, but the sky itself remains unchanged. Whether one thought or 1,000 pass through, the watcher, the sky, remains. Unstirred, unbound. Thoughts move in time. The watcher remains still. Stillness does not mean absence. Quite the opposite. Stillness here is rich, vibrating with presence. The kind of presence that needs no form. The kind of presence that was always here, before names were given, before the mind knew how to say, I am watching. The presence is not personal. It belongs to no one. It simply is. And in that being, everything becomes soft. Softness opens the door to surrender. Not the surrender of giving up, but the surrender of looking without chasing. The observer, once thought to be behind the thoughts, now dissolves into the space between them. Thoughts rise and fall like waves. The watcher becomes the ocean. Or perhaps not even the ocean. Perhaps just the awareness that water exists at all. The loop continues. A thought is seen. Then the act of seeing is seen. Then the one who sees the seeing becomes another object of attention. Back and back it goes, like descending a spiral staircase that leads inward forever. Yet something paradoxical occurs on the descent. The more layers pulled away, the more vastness is revealed. The watcher is not at the end of the spiral. It is the spiral. It is the turning itself. Sometimes the mind seeks comfort in finality, a point where one can say, "Here is the truth. This is the self. This is the one who watches." But this loop offers no such ending. It offers a question with no resolution, a doorway that never leads to a final room. The doorway becomes the experience itself. The loop becomes the lullaby. Let the mind continue its gentle turning. Let thoughts come and go, like stars flickering across the night. No need to capture the watcher. No need to name it. The mind may never find it, because the mind is it. The watcher is not separate from what is watched. The loop is whole. Sleep waits patiently at the edge of the final unspoken question. The thought is watched. The watcher is seen. And what watches that watcher? Only silence answers, wrapping the question in softness, until even the loop forgets to loop, and the mind dissolves into stillness. The Time Traveler's Notebook. A letter sent to the future receives a reply before it was written. Who began the conversation? A letter is placed in a sealed envelope. The ink is still drying as the paper folds, and the words contain secrets meant for a time yet to come. The letter is not written to another, but to a self not yet lived, a self that exists beyond the moment of writing. It is an offering to the future, an attempt to reach across the moving river of time and speak to the one standing on its far bank. But before the envelope can be delivered, another envelope arrives. Different handwriting, different ink. A message from the future self already returned. The response arrives before the question is sent. The effect precedes the cause. The river flows backward. Inside this newly arrived envelope lies something impossible, an answer to a question that has not yet been formed. The letter holds knowledge the present self has not yet discovered, memories of events not yet lived. It feels familiar, like a dream half remembered. How can it know what has not been written? How can the future speak before the present forms the words? The loop begins. The present writes to the future. The future writes back to the present. But once the circle is complete, where did it start? Did the first letter cause the second, or did the second cause the first? Like a coin spinning in midair, the direction becomes indeterminate. Heads or tails, past or future, the distinction fades as the loop continues. This conversation across time becomes a closed circle. The letter received shapes the letter sent. The message changes based on knowledge it should not contain. A paradox unfolds silently. If the future alters the past, does the past still shape the future? Or has causality become a mirror reflecting itself? Some would say time is linear, a straight path from point A to point B. Others whisper that time is a spiral, always circling, always returning. But the letter in the hand defies both ideas. It proves nothing and everything. It exists without needing explanation, like a melody with no beginning note. The loop continues to play, and the mind follows the tune. Is the sender the writer or the reader? Is the one holding the pen the author of destiny, or merely a scribe transcribing what has already occurred? If the answer comes first, then the question becomes a response. But if the question births the answer, then why does the reply precede it? In dreams, such things make sense. One scene fades into the next without needing logic to bridge them. Perhaps the waking mind has simply forgotten how to understand time's deeper rhythm. Perhaps time itself is not bound by direction, but dances in all directions at once. The notebook grows heavier with each entry. Pages fill with messages from future selves, each more cryptic than the last. Warnings, insights, regrets, promises, all written before the actions that birthed them. And with each word, A strange certainty grows. The story is being co-written by someone already gone and someone not yet here. Eventually, the pen is set down. The hands stop writing. The letters remain, folded in quiet piles. Not because the questions were answered, but because the loop no longer needs answering. The dance between cause and effect has become the rhythm of thought itself. The notebook no longer seeks to be understood. It simply is. Time sleeps within the folds of each page, and as the night deepens, the mind softens. The message is complete before it begins. The future and the past speak as one. The loop holds the dream gently, like hands cupped around a candle's flickering flame. Let the letter be written. Let the reply arrive. Let the circle hold itself. The mirror maze. A reflection reflects another reflection. Which image is real? Step into the mirrored room. Walls made of polished glass stretch in every direction, infinitely folding upon themselves. The light is soft, endless, echoing in the silver of every surface. One image appears, clear, detailed, familiar, and then another, and another, each one repeating the first, but just slightly askew. Each reflection gives rise to the next, like ripples in a still pond, and with every ripple, the question grows larger. If every image reflects another, which one is the original? The body moves, and so do the others. A hand lifts, a face turns, and the walls shimmer with motion. Every gesture multiplies into 1,000 echoes, all mimicking the same source. Or is it many sources, each pretending to be the first? Look to the right, and a version looks back. Turn to the left, and another stares in perfect unison. Yet none of these faces contain thought. None of these eyes blink of their own accord. They respond, but never initiate. Still, even the one believed to be the source, the moving figure at the center, can only be seen in reflection. The face is visible only in glass. The idea of the original self exists only through its representation. But is a reflection a lie, or is it the only truth available? If the self is known only through mirrored form, perhaps the mirror tells the truest version. A curious thought unfolds. Maybe none of the images are real, and maybe all of them are. Perhaps the distinction between real and reflection dissolves when no fixed reference point can be found. If every reflection repeats another, and none can be traced to an origin, then the origin becomes undefined, a concept without anchor. The reflections begin to shift. The mind wonders, is the reflection copying the self, or is the self imitating the reflection? Every version moves simultaneously, but only one is thought to possess will. Strip away will, and all versions appear equal. Strip away time, and all movements are one. The maze closes in, not through walls, but through uncertainty. Every step forward is met with a wall that looks like a path. Every direction opens into more reflections of more reflections. Some say mirrors cannot lie. Others insist they show only illusion. But within this maze, neither view remains solid. What lies beyond the mirror cannot be touched. What lies within the mirror cannot be proven. The image is always behind the glass, just out of reach, familiar but untouchable. In ancient stories, mirrors held souls. In science, they reveal light. In dreams, they deceive, morphing form and face. Here, the mirror becomes a portal, not to another world, but to layers within this one. Each reflection reveals a deeper confusion. The self is not a fixed point, but a procession of images constantly forming and dissolving. Step back from the glass, and another version steps back as well. Mimicry persists. No matter how far or close, no matter how still or wild the movement, the reflections follow. But do they follow, or do they lead? Perhaps the sense of being followed is only the illusion of delay. Perhaps all images move together, bound by a single, unseen pulse. The mirrors stretch beyond sight now. Distance loses meaning. The deeper the gaze travels, the less difference exists between one image and the next. Eventually, the eyes no longer search for the real image. Instead, the eyes begin to rest. Let the reflections reflect. Let the maze fold inward. The search for the original has no end, because the original was never singular. It was always plural, always mirrored. Stillness returns. Breath becomes slow. Thought grows soft. Somewhere, deep within the maze, the final mirror forgets to reflect. In its silence, all the other mirrors fade, and all images return to the source, nameless, formless, resting. The self-erasing memory. When forgetting is remembered, has anything been forgotten? A quiet moment arrives, and with it, the faint whisper of a memory that almost returns. The mind reaches out, grasping at the edges, fingers brushing against something familiar but vanishing. A face, a sentence, a dream. The details dissolve before they form. Still, the impression remains. Something was once known, and now it isn't. And yet, somehow, the forgetting is remembered. Here lies the paradox. To forget something implies loss, but to remember forgetting suggests that part of it remains. Is the memory truly gone, or has it merely changed shape? Perhaps the event is lost, but the ghost of the event lingers. Like footprints left after the tide, there is evidence of presence, even when the subject has disappeared. Memory does not function like a box, where contents are stored and retrieved intact. It is more like mist, condensing and evaporating, shifting, reforming. What is remembered today may not be remembered tomorrow, and what seems forgotten may rise again in a dream, uninvited and whole. When forgetting is noticed, what exactly is being seen? Not the memory itself, but the absence of it. That absence has weight. It has color. It has meaning. And in that meaning, the memory continues to live, not as information, but as silence. A silence shaped like something once known. The mind may try to reconstruct. A place is summoned, then a name, then a feeling. But none of them click. They circle the missing memory like planets around a vanished sun. And yet, that orbit forms something real. That gravitational pull proves that something once lived there. Forgetting, in this way, becomes a form of remembering. Not a full picture, but an outline. Not a melody, but a hum. Not the object, but its shadow. Is this partial remembering truly forgetting? Or is forgetting simply another mode of memory? There are layers to this process. First comes forgetting. Then comes the awareness of the forgetting. And beyond that lies the interpretation. Why does this lost memory matter? What does its absence mean? Why does the mind cling to the shape of something it cannot hold? Some memories disappear out of kindness. Painful echoes that fade for survival. Others vanish from neglect, slipping between the cracks of days too full to hold them. Still others were never fully formed, half-lived moments that barely registered, now returning as riddles without answers. And yet, each act of remembering the forgetting reveals a deeper truth. The mind never stops listening. Even when a memory cannot be recalled, its absence is felt. That feeling becomes its own presence. The empty shelf where the book once sat now holds the echo of its weight. Let the forgotten be forgotten. Let the remembered be partial. The mind does not require full recall to know something existed. The self is not diminished by holes in the narrative. The holes themselves tell a story, a quiet story, one that breathes between the remembered and the lost. As the thought of forgetting fades into itself, a gentle peace settles. There is no need to recover what is gone. The forgetting has become its own memory. It loops upon itself, no longer seeking resolution, just presence. And with that presence, rest returns. No memory required, no past demanded, just the soft rhythm of thought folding into thought, until the mind falls still. The silent voice. A voice speaks silently within. Who is listening? There is a voice that carries no sound, no breath, no vibration. It does not pass through the air, does not touch the ear, does not leave a trace on the world outside. And yet, it speaks. Its words arrive not from the mouth, but from somewhere deeper, from a place where language has no physical form. It whispers through thoughts, narrates each moment, judges, reasons, wonders. But in this silence, one question echoes louder than all the others. Who is listening? This voice cannot be turned off easily. It weaves itself through waking hours like a constant current beneath the surface of attention. It labels, plans, replays, anticipates. It names the world before the world is even seen. It speaks in the first person, yet never opens its lips. It converses in solitude, and sometimes it argues with itself. Despite its persistence, it remains elusive. Where does it originate? Is it simply the mind thinking aloud, or is it something more autonomous, more primal? The voice feels familiar, so familiar that its presence often goes unnoticed, like the background hum of a machine that's always been running. But the moment it is noticed, the nature of the voice becomes strange. If it speaks without speaking, how does its sound reach the listener? The listener is not the ears, for the ears are not needed here. This conversation requires no sensory input. No vibration travels through the bones. No wave passes through the air. And yet, the words are clear. A sentence forms in the mind, and understanding follows. Comprehension does not rely on sound. It relies on awareness. And still, awareness is not the voice. The voice may speak, but the awareness observes. One acts, the other witnesses. But what observes the observer? This loop begins again. The voice speaks. The listener listens. And then, the listener becomes aware of listening. The awareness folds in on itself, recognizing that what hears is not the ears, but something else entirely. Something unlocatable, formless, yet undeniably present. Some traditions say this voice is the ego, the constructed sense of self that narrates identity into being. Others say it is the soul, guiding thought in subtle whispers. Others still claim it is just neural activity, firing across patterns built from language and memory. But regardless of explanation, the experience remains the same: an inner voice that never rests, and a silent listener that never sleeps. This voice can comfort. It can soothe with quiet reassurance, remind the heart of what matters, steady the mind when storms begin to rise. But it can also disturb. It can loop endlessly in worry, replay mistakes, inject doubt into stillness. It can convince the listener that every thought it speaks is truth. Yet here lies the opportunity to watch the voice speak without needing to believe it, to observe the thought forming without grasping it, to hear without attachment. In this distance between voice and listener, space opens. The voice continues its murmur, but the listener no longer becomes the voice. Over time, the voice may soften, it may pause, it may surrender to moments of pure silence. And in those silences, something deeper speaks, not with words, but with presence. A kind of knowing that has no language, a clarity that comes without narration. The silent voice dissolves, and the listener becomes the listening itself. And yet, the loop remains. The voice may return. The listener listens again. The question arises once more: who is hearing the voice that speaks without sound? And when the voice goes quiet, does the listener remain? Even in dreams, the voice often continues. Characters speak, internal dialogue persists, and yet the world remains silent. The voice exists even when the body is asleep. So, what part of consciousness carries this voice forward? And what part holds the ear that hears it? Perhaps the voice and the listener are not separate at all. Perhaps they are two faces of the same awareness, folded inward, reflecting each other across the stillness of thought. One rises, the other receives. Then the roles reverse. The voice listens to itself. Eventually, words become slow, thoughts grow soft. The silent voice fades into background mist. The listener drifts deeper, until even the awareness of listening dissolves. What remains is not voice, not sound, not even silence, only rest. The dreamer's paradox. In dreams of waking, is sleep still dreaming? A dream begins not with a curtain, but with a veil, thin, transparent, weightless. The mind crosses through it unknowingly, stepping into landscapes sculpted from memory, imagination, and the mysterious residue of unspoken desires. In these dreamscapes, the ordinary laws unravel. Time forgets its order, space forgets its edges, gravity bends politely, and the self becomes anything it wishes or fears to be. Sometimes within this shifting world, a thought arises. This must be a dream. The scenery falters, logic stutters, characters behave like echoes from stories never told. And then, the dream shifts again. Now it becomes a dream about waking. The dreamer dreams of rising, of opening the eyes, of stepping into the waking world. But within the dream, the waking is not waking. It is only another layer. This paradox curls inward. When sleep contains the illusion of waking, what is truly real? The dream insists it is awake. The sun feels warm, the floor holds solid, the voices have weight. Yet behind it, sleep still holds the dreamer. Eyes remain closed, muscles remain still. The body lies motionless beneath blankets of breath. A dream of waking is convincing. It imitates awareness so precisely that even the self is fooled. A dreamer can dream of questioning reality. A dreamer can dream of remembering the past. A dreamer can even dream of dreaming. But all of it occurs within the theater of sleep. And yet, the mystery deepens. If one dreams of waking, and within that waking, another dream begins, then where is the edge between sleep and wakefulness? How many layers must be peeled back before something solid is found? Or is solidity itself an illusion created by the mind seeking comfort? The paradox offers no resolution. It exists to stretch the mind gently, to loosen its grip on certainty. Just as waking moments can feel dreamlike, so can dreams feel startlingly real. Memory and imagination overlap. Emotion outlives logic. Dreams blur the definition of experience, bending reality into something more fluid, more malleable. In some dreams, time passes slowly, entire lifetimes lived in the span of a breath. In others, identity shifts, and the self is no longer the self known in waking life. Yet the emotional truth remains strong. Tears fall. Laughter rises. Fear chases through corridors. These responses feel real, even if their causes dissolve upon waking. So, if dreams can imitate waking so perfectly, can waking be another kind of dream? One held more tightly, one agreed upon by many minds instead of just one? What if sleep is not the absence of reality, but simply another way reality expresses itself? The dreamer dreams of waking. The waking mind recalls the dream. But what if both are dreaming of each other, endlessly looping? Sleep dreams of awareness. Awareness dreams of sleep. The self lies between them, always in motion, always becoming. Eventually, the question quiets. The mind softens. Whether the dream continues or ends no longer matters. The paradox becomes a cradle, rocking thought gently into stillness. No need to wake, no need to sleep, just the rhythm of dreaming itself, echoing within silence. The circle of truths. Each truth rests upon another. What holds the first? A statement appears. This is true. It stands confidently, like a stone in still water. But lean in closer, and beneath the stone, another rests, Another truth, one upon which the first depends. That second truth holds the first, supports it invisibly. Trace the second downward, and there lies a third. A fourth waits under the third. And down it goes deeper, each layer cradling the one above. Each truth claims solidity, but none stands alone. Every fact rests on another, an assumption, a definition, an interpretation. Even the most obvious truths are branches of unseen roots. The sun rises. A simple truth. But does it rise, or does the earth rotate? Beneath that, a truth about physics. Beneath that, truths about perception, about motion, about naming. Each truth wears a mask made of simpler truths, and behind each mask lies another. Eventually, the mind wonders, where does the chain begin? What truth stands alone, unsupported, unassumed? What holds the first? If every belief, every law, every principle leans on something else, then either the chain loops in a circle or it descends forever into uncertainty. And if it loops, then the last truth supports the first, and the circle feeds itself. But can a truth prove itself using its own reflection? Take, for instance, the idea that reason reveals truth. That belief is trusted, yet reason relies on logic, and logic depends on definitions. Definitions arise from language. Language comes from shared understanding, and shared understanding is filtered through experience. But experience is shaped by perception, and perception is filtered by the mind. The mind, too, is shaped by memory, emotion, conditioning. The circle is not simple. It is vast, a web without a clear beginning. Truth may be imagined as a tower. At the top sits an idea. This is certain. Each floor beneath supports it. Remove a floor, and the tower wobbles. Remove two, and the structure leans. At what point does it collapse? And what lies beneath the foundation? Is there a final stone that holds it all? Some say intuition. Others say logic. Some point to divinity. Others to evidence. But each of these is another floor, not the ground. Even faith rests on something, on longing, on hope, on trust. Even evidence rests on measurement, and measurement on instruments, and instruments on interpretation. The tower becomes a circle. The circle becomes a spiral. Each truth leads back to another truth, reworded, rephrased, returned in disguise. A loop begins. This is true, because that is true, and that is true, because this is true. The loop comforts the mind, but does it satisfy? Step outside the circle for a moment. Watch the truths chase their own tails. What if the game isn't about finding the first, but about recognizing the circle itself? What if truth is not a point, but a rhythm? Not a foundation, but a dance? Even mathematics, the most precise of languages, rests on axioms, truths accepted without proof. The game begins only once those are agreed upon. And so, even in the most certain of fields, a leap of faith begins the process. The mind seeks certainty the way a tree seeks sunlight, but certainty is elusive, flickering like light through leaves. Grasp too hard, and it fades. Hold gently, and it glows. Perhaps the first truth cannot be seen because it is the seer, the lens through which all others are measured. And perhaps that lens cannot observe itself. A scale cannot weigh itself. A knife cannot cut itself. If the first truth is the awareness that seeks truth, then the search turns inward, endlessly. But there is another possibility, that truth is not linear, that it is not stacked or looped, but radiant, like light from a source never found. Each truth a beam, all radiating from somewhere beyond grasp. In this image, no truth holds another. All truths point outward and inward simultaneously. The first truth is everywhere and nowhere. And still, the mind whispers, what holds the first? What exists without needing reason, assumption, or faith? Perhaps silence holds it. The space between words. The stillness beneath thought. Truth may not be found in explanation, but in experience. Not in structure, but in awareness. And so, the search slows. Not because the answer is found, but because the question has become beautiful. The circle turns gently. The tower stands quietly. The truths no longer demand to be absolute. They float, softly supported by one another, suspended in the vastness of wonder. The reality filter. Perception defines the world. But who confirms the perception? A flower blooms beneath sunlight. The petals glow red. The stem bends slightly to one side. The scent is subtle. The texture is delicate. A beautiful moment, real, unmistakable. But consider this. The redness is not in the flower. The color lives in perception. The scent is not in the air. It is shaped within a mind. The softness is not in the petal, but in the nerve endings that respond. What, then, is the flower? Perception defines what is seen, smelled, touched, understood. Without perception, even the most vivid object has no experience. Remove sight, and the flower is no longer red. Remove smell, and its fragrance vanishes. Remove touch, and texture dissolves. The object remains. But what remains of it? Every sense is a filter. Light enters the eyes, is flipped and interpreted. Vibrations pass through the ear, become sound. Molecules touch the tongue, become flavor. All of this occurs within the bounds of a nervous system, shaped by genetics, by environment, by memory. No perception is raw. All experience passes through a lens. So when the world is seen, what is truly being seen? Is it the world, or a version shaped by perception's hand? Is it reality, or is it the mind's best guess, based on incomplete data and endless comparison? Take color. What appears red to one mind may appear duller to another. Insects see ultraviolet. Dogs see a limited range. What appears as truth to one species does not even exist for another. Even among humans, perception varies wildly. Taste, smell, texture, none are universal. And so, the world exists not as a single reality, but as many layered experiences. Yet, the question remains, who confirms perception? If all is filtered, then what guarantees the filter is showing anything real? A mirror shows an image, but who ensures the mirror reflects accurately? A dream feels real while it lasts. Only waking shows it was false. But what confirms waking itself? Is there a perception that perceives without distortion? A seeing that does not interpret? A hearing that receives sound without shaping meaning? The question curls inward. The filter tries to examine itself. Language complicates things. Words define perception, but also shape it. Name something, and it becomes something. Before naming, it simply is. Once named, it enters the structure of thought, categorized, compared, interpreted. The raw world is replaced by the labeled world, and the labeled world is lived in more than the raw one. Step back. Let perception flow without naming. Let the senses report without comment. Let sight be light. Let sound be vibration. Let thought be passing cloud. In this space, something unusual happens. Perception no longer demands confirmation. It simply exists. Experience unfolds without proof. And yet, the question hums gently beneath it all. Who is it that perceives? What is it that stands behind the eyes, behind the mind, watching the movie play? Not the body, not the senses. Something else, nameless, faceless, yet always present. Some traditions call it consciousness. Others call it awareness. But even these are names, and names are filters. Whatever it is, it does not shout. It listens. It does not analyze. It observes. It does not confirm reality. It rests beneath it. Perhaps the need for confirmation is itself a symptom of perception's distortion. Perhaps reality does not require proof to be real. Perhaps existence needs no permission. The flower is not less real because it is filtered. The filter is part of the flower's unfolding. Still, the mystery remains. A world is seen, but who is the seer? A life is lived, but who lives it? Perception paints the picture. Thought explains the painting, but the canvas remains hidden. And in the quiet of that hidden canvas, sleep begins to draw closer. Not from exhaustion, but from surrender. The mind no longer needs to solve. The question no longer demands an answer. Perception fades gently into stillness. The filter rests. The observer sleeps. The choice illusion. When every choice is shaped by past causes, what remains freely chosen? A fork appears in the path. Two roads stretch ahead, left and right. One promises adventure, the other, safety. The mind pauses, weighing outcomes. A thought arises. This is a choice. But pause longer, and the stillness deepens. The question surfaces, was this choice ever free? Behind each preference lies a chain, a lineage of unseen influences. The love of adventure might trace back to childhood, to stories told beneath warm blankets, to parents who encouraged exploration, to friends who laughed on wild summer nights. The pull toward safety may trace through memories of loss, of falling, of pain too sudden to forget. Each desire shaped not in the moment, but in the architecture of days long past. Every decision leans on memory, on habits, on stories repeated until they become silent laws. Even the act of choosing between coffee and tea echoes generations, family customs, cultural rituals, health warnings, subtle associations. Preferences become declarations, but the origin of each remains buried. So when a decision is made, what part of it is spontaneous? What part emerges untethered from history? Consider the brain, a network of signals, patterns, learned responses. Touch a stove and feel pain. Learn. Avoid next time. Look into another's eyes and see kindness. Remember, seek it again. The body moves in rhythms shaped by survival. The mind organizes experience to predict, to navigate. These mechanisms function with astonishing speed, crafting a sense of control. Yet the source code remains hidden. A thought appears. I will act freely. But even that thought, where did it come from? It arises without bidding, unannounced. It claims authorship, but its birth remains a mystery. Some call this the grand illusion, the idea that choice is freely made, when in truth, every action is conditioned. Neurons fire based on chemistry. Chemistry shifts based on biology. Biology adapts based on environment. And environment is shaped by forces outside control. Does this mean free will is a myth? That no choice is ever real? Pause here. Let the question stretch. Let the edges blur. Perhaps free will has been misunderstood. Perhaps it is not the absence of influence, but the presence of awareness within the influence. Not the breaking of the chain, but the noticing of the links. A reaction without awareness is automatic. A reaction with awareness becomes response. Still shaped, yes, but no longer blind. In the noticing, something opens. Take the same fork in the path, left or right. The mind recalls the past, weighs the risks, sees the echoes. But now, something different stirs. Not the urge to escape influence, but the willingness to look at it clearly. In that pause, a new space arises. Not pure freedom, but conscious participation. And in that space, perhaps freedom is redefined. Not as the ability to act without cause, but as the clarity to see the causes and still act with intention. Not as a godlike detachment from the past, but as a compassionate turning toward it, with full understanding. The illusion dissolves not by proving choice false, but by softening the grasp on control. The mind no longer needs to prove its freedom. It simply acts, aware of the river it flows within. Sometimes the current is strong, sometimes it slows, but even in the strongest current, there remains a subtle hand that can shift the paddle, a gentle nudge, a different angle. Not escape, but guidance. This hand does not belong to the self imagined as the thinker, the decider. It belongs to something deeper, perhaps awareness itself, perhaps presence, perhaps the still, silent witness beneath all thought. Let the idea of freedom float gently now. No need to hold it tightly. Let the mind watch its own thoughts move, watch its own choices unfold. Even this watching is part of the dance. Eventually, even the need to choose fades. The fork disappears. The road continues. Left and right merge into one quiet path. The choice was always just one step at a time, and each step contained the entire story. The Endless Book. A book describes its own reading, forever turning its first page. A book sits on a table, unassuming. Its cover is soft, worn from years of gentle hands. The pages are thick, yellowed slightly at the edges, heavy with words. No title graces the spine. No author claims its creation. Only an invitation lies on the first page. Begin here. So the first page is turned. And there, in neat, measured lines, the book begins to describe itself. It speaks of the moment the cover was opened. It describes the way the paper feels under fingers. It details the act of reading the very sentence being read. Strange. The book narrates in real time. The reader becomes the character. The act of reading becomes the plot. With each word, the next word emerges, but not from memory or ink. It emerges from the act of being seen. The story continues. Now this sentence is being read. Then, this moment is part of the turning of the page. Then, the reader is wondering how the book knows. The book does not tell a tale. It reflects an experience. A mirror made of paragraphs. Curiosity builds. Where will it lead? Flip to the next chapter. There, again, it begins. This is the beginning. The book always begins. Every page insists it is the first. Every chapter claims it is the true start. And so, the loop begins. Each section reflects the act of reaching it. Each line unfolds only when it is seen. But the ending never comes. No conclusion waits at the back. Only more beginnings, more first pages, more awareness of the reading itself. Time behaves differently in these pages. Hours pass, but the story never progresses. Not in the way stories typically do. No climax, no resolution, only deeper noticing, deeper mirroring. The book begins to change the one who reads. Not with content, but with form. It causes questions to rise. What is reading? What is story? Who is the narrator if the reader is the subject? Eventually, a question arises. Who wrote this book? If it always mirrors the moment of reading, was it written in advance? Or is it being written now, by the act of turning pages? Perhaps the book writes itself through attention. Perhaps it is not a book at all, but a portal. A recursive doorway. A spiral with no end. Perhaps it was never meant to be finished, only entered. Some pages are blank. Others filled with symbols unfamiliar, yet deeply resonant. Occasionally, a line appears in bold. This is the first page. Even though it comes hundreds of pages deep. And somehow, it feels true. The book becomes a meditation. Not on story, but on perception. Not on plot, but on the experience of presence. A story that tells itself as long as attention remains. A book that ceases to exist the moment it is forgotten. The final page is searched for, but it cannot be found. Each time the back cover is reached, another page appears, another beginning, another first line. Begin here. Eventually, resistance fades. The desire for ending fades. Reading becomes not a journey toward, but a resting within. No longer seeking the last word, only watching the current one arise. And then, a strange peace, a comfort in the endlessness, a joy in the return to the start. The book does not trap, it frees. It reveals that beginnings are not places in time, but states of mind. So let the page turn again. Let the first sentence reappear. Let the story begin once more, not for the sake of an ending, but for the beauty of the unfolding. And within that unfolding, the mind grows quiet. The inverted thought. To avoid a thought is to summon it. Where can it hide? A thought appears like a spark in the dark, sudden, uninvited. It hovers for a moment, not yet fully formed. Just the hint of an image, the beginning of a sentence, the stir of a memory. The mind reacts. Not this thought. Not now. Not again. The effort to resist begins. A wall is raised. Focus is shifted. Attention turns towards something safer, more welcome. But resistance creates tension, and tension sharpens the edge of the thing avoided. The thought, once hazy, becomes sharper. It grows in contrast, like a shadow strengthened by bright light. The attempt to avoid becomes the act of highlighting. This is the nature of the inverted thought. The more effort is poured into its disappearance, the more persistent it becomes. The more energy is spent on forgetting, the more deeply it is etched. Each push is a pull. Each refusal is an invitation, a trap made of intention. The mind has been told that control is power, that thoughts can be selected, discarded, replaced. But thoughts are not obedient creatures. They arise from unknown depths, stir without command, vanish without permission. They are wild weather across the landscape of awareness. To banish a storm is to stand in its path with open hands. Consider the classic example. Do not think of the pink elephant. The instruction seems simple, but the image appears instantly, not despite the command, but because of it. The very act of naming the forbidden makes it present. The thought was not there before. It arrived through resistance. This is not failure. This is nature. Attention cannot reject without acknowledging. Awareness cannot push something away without first holding it. Avoidance requires a map of what to avoid. In sketching the map, the territory is drawn. So where can the inverted thought go to hide? Not in distraction. Distraction is a loop. One image replaces another, but the replaced remains, waiting. Not in suppression. Suppression is pressure. The thought is buried, not erased. Beneath the soil, it grows in secret. Perhaps it hides best in softness, in allowance, in gentle observation. When no push is made, the thought loses shape. When no spotlight is cast, the shadow fades. A paradox arises. Attention turned toward the thought without resistance allows it to unfold, breathe, and pass. Attention that clings or repels gives it form, weight, duration. This is not the same as indulgence. To indulge is to feed. To allow is to witness. Imagine a thought like a flame. A hand tries to smother it. It flickers and dances more. Wind tries to blow it out. It twists higher. But place no hand near it. Do not fight. Simply sit beside it. And in time, it quiets. A flicker, a curl of smoke, then gone. The inverted thought is not an enemy. It is a reflection, a signal, a reminder. It repeats because it is unacknowledged. It lingers because it is misunderstood. Sometimes it carries pain. Other times, desire. Often, fear. But always it seeks something. To be seen, to be understood, or to be let go. So the practice shifts. No longer avoidance. No longer resistance. Only stillness. The thought is allowed to come. It is not given control, but neither is it exiled. And in this allowing, something shifts. The thought no longer needs to hide. The energy once spent resisting returns to calm. The mind softens. Eventually, the thought passes. Not because it was destroyed, but because it was seen. Seen without fear. Seen without attachment. It loses its fuel. It fades. Where does the thought go? Perhaps it was never a thing to go anywhere. Perhaps it was a momentary ripple, passing through a still pond. The ripple never had weight. It never had substance. It was the movement of awareness itself. And now, the pond is still again. The backward map. A mind draws a map of itself, using itself. Which part draws, and which is drawn? Imagine a cartographer standing at the edge of an unmapped land. The terrain stretches far in every direction. Valleys of memory, mountains of thought, rivers of emotion, forests of sensation. The map must be drawn. The lines must be clear. But the tool in the cartographer's hand is not pencil or ink. It is the very mind that must be mapped. A strange loop begins. The mapmaker is part of the terrain. The eye that sees the landscape is shaped by the landscape. The mind tries to draw itself while being drawn. Which part observes? Which part reports? Which part remains untouched, pure enough to measure what it belongs to? A mind reflecting upon itself is a mirror turned inward. But mirrors require distance. How does one step away from the mirror that is the self? How can the observer separate from what is being observed? Try to map a memory. The moment returns, but altered. Colored by emotion, shaped by the present. The memory is not static. It morphs under the light of reflection. Then, try to map a belief. Where did it begin? Follow its roots, and they dissolve into childhood, culture, fleeting moments of influence. The belief rests on memory. The memory rests on perception. The perception shifts with time. Now try to map the present thought. It appears, but in the process of naming it, the thought changes. It reacts to being noticed. It curves away from definition. It becomes aware of being observed. The drawing hand trembles. A backward map is not like any ordinary map. It cannot be laid flat. It loops and twists. Each point leads to another, then back again. The act of mapping becomes the terrain. The more closely it is studied, the more elusive it becomes. And still, the need to understand persists. Perhaps the desire to map the mind is not to control it, but to witness it. Not to label every corner, but to travel through it with awareness. Not to claim it as territory, but to greet it as home. Consider the part that watches the mind work, the awareness behind the process. This watcher seems steady, unchanging, always present. But even that watcher becomes part of the map when noticed. And then, another layer appears, the observer of the observer. And then, another. The loop continues, inward and inward. At what point does the observer disappear into the observed? Perhaps the map cannot be completed. Perhaps completion was never the goal. Perhaps the value lies in the drawing, not the drawing's end. Even when the map folds in on itself, it reveals something, not a static structure, but a living, breathing system of perception. A world in flux. A self that is never singular. A process, not a point. Let the map be drawn, imperfect and beautiful. Let the lines curve, fade, reappear. Let the mind explore itself, not as a project to finish, but as a field to walk through. Eventually, the need to define dissolves. The map is not needed to know the land. The feet feel the ground. The breath tastes the air. The heart hears the wind in the trees. And somewhere within the ever-shifting terrain, the map folds itself into silence. The silent argument. Conflicting inner voices speak. Which one speaks the loudest silence? Within the quiet space of thought, voices begin to stir. Some rise with certainty, others whisper doubt. One declares a plan, another questions its worth. One voice insists on movement, the next begs for stillness. They do not shout, but neither are they silent. each voice, a current in the stream of mind, pushing against the others in subtle turbulence. The argument begins without noise. No raised tones, no spoken words, only the steady hum of opposing thoughts weaving through the moment. One voice draws a line, another redraws it. One offers assurance, another casts shadow. They overlap, interrupt, rephrase, reframe. This is the silent argument. The inner debate that never reaches a podium, that never calls for applause, that resolves in neither victory nor defeat. It begins in thought and spirals through layers of the unseen, of friction not of sound, but of presence. The voices do not come from outside. They emerge from the same source, wear different costumes, take different tones. The confident one speaks with the authority of memory. The hesitant one carries the weight of fear. The hopeful one dances lightly, rising like breath. Each believes its own truth. Each claims to speak for the whole. No referee appears. No judgment declares a winner. The argument turns inward, feeding on itself. One voice points to logic, another to emotion. One clings to experience, another calls for the unknown. The louder one rarely wins. Often, it is the quieter one that lingers longest. A single phrase, calmly repeated, can eclipse 100 frantic suggestions. What makes a voice louder when it does not make sound? What gives one current more weight in the ocean of thought? Sometimes it is the voice closest to the center. Not the most intense, not the most clever, but the one that moves in alignment with stillness. The one that does not rush to speak, but simply remains. It is not always first to arrive. Often, it is last. It waits until the noise dies down, then speaks without speaking. This is the loudest silence. It does not argue. It does not convince. It does not need to win. Its presence alone begins to quiet the others. Its clarity does not come from volume, but from resonance. It feels true, not because it declares truth, but because it fits without force. Sometimes, it takes the form of a knowing, a sense that does not explain itself. Sometimes it arrives as a release. No need to choose, no pressure to decide. It offers space, not answers. Space in which the argument softens. And when the voices are no longer fighting, what remains? Not resolution, perhaps, but acceptance. Not silence in the absence of sound, but silence that contains all voices and still listens. A silence that does not need to speak to be heard. The argument ends not because one voice wins, but because the mind no longer clings to the need for a winner. The voices may still speak, but their urgency fades. The internal courtroom empties. The judge takes no side. There is room now for thought without tension, for decision without debate, for motion without resistance. Not because the voices are gone, but because they are no longer mistaken for the self. The loudest silence remains. It was always there, beneath the debate, beneath the noise, beneath the names. It did not intervene. It did not choose sides. It simply waited, spacious, complete. And now, as the voices grow dim, that silence becomes a cradle. Thought rests. Argument dissolves. Awareness settles. The mind listens, and the silence answers. The infinite question. Every answer begets another question. What answers the last? A question appears, clear, simple, full of potential. Why? It arrives not with doubt, but with curiosity. A gentle invitation to look deeper, to pull at the thread, to follow the trail of thought into the unknown. An answer is given. It satisfies for a moment. Then comes the next question. How? Then, what caused it? Then, what lies beneath that cause? And so the chain begins. One answer leads to another question. Each conclusion births a new beginning. The mind climbs a staircase that never ends. Each step another layer, each layer revealing more mystery. This is not a failure of inquiry. This is its nature. Each truth uncovered reveals the vastness beyond it. Like peeling layers of an onion, no final core is reached. Just more layers, softer, subtler, more difficult to name. Even certainty dissolves beneath the next question. Ask, what is real? And answer with perception. Then ask, what is perception? And answer with brain function. Ask again, what is the brain? And find atoms, molecules, patterns. Each time a solid surface is reached, it breaks open into finer dust. The universe, too, responds with endless complexity. The telescope sees further. The microscope sees smaller. Galaxies stretch beyond vision. Cells reveal worlds within worlds. Every attempt to grasp the whole reveals more edges. So the question deepens. Is there a final answer? A place where inquiry ends, where the mind can say, here, at last, is truth beyond question. Perhaps not. Perhaps the infinite loop is not a trap, but a gift. A design not of confusion, but of expansion. Questions stretch awareness, expand possibility, keep certainty from becoming a cage. Even the question, who is asking, turns inward. It shifts focus from outer knowledge to inner knowing. The seeker becomes the sought. Who wants to know leads to what is wanting, leads to what is. The loop tightens, and yet deepens. Eventually, the mind may reach the edge of language. Questions continue, but words fail. Not because the answers are wrong, but because the structure of questioning cannot reach the heart of being. Some things are not solved. They are entered. Some truths are not found. They are lived. And still, the infinite question circles. What lies beyond the last why? What remains when all seeking ends? Silence. Not the silence of absence, but the silence of presence. A stillness so full, it no longer needs inquiry. A knowing so complete, it no longer requires articulation. This silence is not the opposite of the question. It is its fulfillment. The end not in conclusion, but in surrender. Not because the mind gives up, but because the mind sees the pattern. The last answer is not a word. It is a breath, a pause, a resting in the moment without needing to reach beyond it. The loop still exists. Questions will arise again. The mind is built to ask. But something within no longer needs the final answer to feel at peace. And so the mind folds its questions into quietness. The last question fades, not because it was answered, but because it no longer needs to be asked. The stillness remains. The knowing stone. If a rock dreams of thinking, is thought merely a harder silence? A stone lies beneath the moss, untouched for decades. Rain smooths its edges. Wind polishes its surface. The sun warms it by day. Frost tightens its shape by night. It does not move, does not speak, does not think. So it is said. But what if it dreams? Not dreams as minds know them. Not stories, not symbols, not movement across inner landscapes, but a deeper kind of dreaming. A dreaming without thought. A dreaming without time. A resting so complete that it becomes indistinguishable from stillness itself. The stone does not resist what touches it. It receives the world in quiet. Every element leaves a mark. Tiny indentations, weathered lines, slight shifts in weight and temperature. Nothing is rejected. Nothing is clung to. The stone remembers without memory. Imagine for a moment that the stone holds a thought, not in words, not in images, but as density, a concentration of presence so compact it becomes impenetrable. This thought does not seek expression. It does not seek understanding. It simply is. Perhaps thought in its purest form is not motion, but compression. Not noise, but form. The stone becomes a metaphor for this compressed awareness. It does not articulate, but neither is it unconscious. It simply does not divide itself into thinker and thought. In the mind, Thought is fast. A flicker, a spark, an echo bouncing through corridors. Words chase meaning. Ideas multiply. The stream rushes forward. In the stone, nothing rushes. Nothing needs to be understood. Being is enough. So the question arises, is thinking always noise? Or is it possible that thinking is only a softened form of silence made visible? If the stone dreams of thinking, then perhaps what it dreams is what the mind has forgotten, how to hold a single idea without speaking it. The stone teaches by not teaching. It holds no opinions, no answers, no preferences. Yet it remains, enduring, stable, constant. It watches generations pass without judgment, without interference. Its wisdom is in its stillness. Try to listen as the stone listens. No reaction, no shaping, no commentary, just reception. Every sound, every breath, every movement received and released. The stone does not argue with the world. It does not seek to fix, nor does it attempt to escape. It is. In a world saturated with thought, this form of knowing becomes rare. But perhaps it is not gone. Perhaps it lives beneath the rapid voice of the mind, under the interpretations and narratives. A harder silence, waiting to be remembered. Sometimes, in deep rest or long stillness, something like the stone emerges within, a center untouched by movement, a gravity that holds without pulling. It does not speak, but it is not deaf. It does not think, but it knows. Not knowledge built of facts, but knowing shaped by presence. Could it be that the stone knows more than it appears? Could it be that thinking is not an opposite to silence, but an echo of it? Perhaps the deepest thought is not loud, not elaborate, but heavy, like a stone in the palm, solid, undeniable. And if the stone dreams, what does it dream of? Not motion, not change, not even purpose. It dreams of being itself. That dream, if heard, becomes the softest invitation, a call to rest, a call to shed the need to explain, to prove, to analyze, a call to simply exist, without resistance, without interpretation. So the mind leans into the weight of the moment, not heavy with burden, but full with presence. The thought slow, the effort eases, the silence thickens, not as absence, but as a form. And within that form, something remains. Not a word, not a thought, only the knowing of the stone. The future reflection. A self yet to be watches from ahead. Who taught it how? Far ahead on the path, a figure stands, not clearly seen, but sensed. This figure resembles the one walking now, yet more refined, not perfected, but shaped by time, by challenge, by choice. This future self holds the weight of everything that is still unfolding. The strange part is this. Sometimes, that future version seems to be watching, not remembered, not imagined, but somehow observing, patiently, quietly, as though it has already walked this path and now looks back, waiting for the present to catch up. What does it mean to be watched by what has not yet arrived? Perhaps this future self is not watching with eyes, but with presence, not guiding with force, but with example. Its form is shaped not just by outcome, but by intention. A reflection cast ahead, formed by each thought, each action, each hesitation. Yet the question stirs. Who taught it how to become what it is? Did the future teach the present through subtle nudges, gut instincts, quiet desires, half-formed longings? Or is the future only an echo of the choices made now, shaped retroactively like footprints solidified in sand? This reflection is not static. It shifts with every decision, every turn, every word left spoken or unspoken. And yet, something about it remains consistent, a core that does not waver, even as everything else moves. Sometimes, in moments of deep silence or clear vision, the reflection comes close. A sense of direction is felt, not from the outside, but from within. A whisper that says, "This way." A knowing that cannot be explained, only trusted. That knowing does not come from the past. It does not arise from memory. It feels ahead, not behind. And though the feet still stand in the present, the pull is forward. This future self may not exist in time. It may not be bound by linear unfolding. It might reside in potential, always forming, always reflecting what is becoming. It is not a destination, but a mirror that responds to movement. And yet, the mirror feels alive. It does not judge, but it sees. It does not interfere, but it watches. It holds a gaze that feels both intimate and distant, like a lighthouse across the ocean of now. In hard moments, this reflection strengthens. In uncertain times, it grows clearer. Not because the future is known, but because the presence of what could be acts like a guide, wordless, imageless, yet undeniable. So who taught it how? Perhaps the same force that breathes thought into being, the same presence that hears the inner voice before it speaks, the same awareness that watches the watcher. No teacher, no student, just unfolding. The self ahead is not separate from the self now. It is not waiting at the finish line. It is being shaped in real time, not by ambition, but by attention, by each moment given to the silent knowing. This reflection is not about becoming something greater. It is about remembering that what is becoming has always been within. The future self is not better. It is simply less entangled, less distracted, more aligned with what has always been true. And eventually, the distance between now and then narrows. The reflection no longer feels far away. It no longer looks ahead. It begins to overlap with the present, until the two are one gaze. At that point, the reflection no longer needs to be seen. It becomes the seer, and in that meeting, the mind rests, not in certainty, not in arrival, but in quiet recognition. The sleeping brain loop. Thoughts attempt to end thought. Does the act achieve its own undoing? A single thought arrives, soft as mist. It is time to rest. The mind hears this with curiosity, as if a part of itself has stepped forward to speak. Immediately, another thought appears in response. How? And then another. Now. And another. Why is it still thinking? This is the beginning of the loop. The desire to sleep activates the thinker. But to think about sleeping is to stir the mind awake. The effort to quiet thought becomes another thought. A gentle paradox. The only path to stillness is through stillness. But effort is movement, and movement is thought. The loop tightens. Thought tries to silence itself. Thought thinks about not thinking. The mind tries to catch itself mid-spin. Each time it turns inward to stop the spin, it only spins more. Like a hand trying to erase itself by drawing. Some thoughts offer tactics. Focus on the breath. Count backward from 100. Imagine the darkening of the body like the setting sun. These thoughts are soft, helpful perhaps, but still thoughts. Still motion within the system that longs to stop. The question emerges, quiet but persistent. Can thought think itself into non-thinking? Try watching the attempt. A thought rises. Let go. Then comes the noticing. That was a thought. The awareness doubles back on itself. Then it asks, was that noticing a thought too? The loop deepens. The thinker becomes the thought it's trying to silence. This is the sleeping brain loop, the mind caught in the act of attempting to quiet the mind. A feedback circuit, a spiral, a Mobius strip made of attention. Is there a way out? Not by force, not by finding the perfect mantra, the perfect posture, the perfect ritual. Those things may help, but they do not escape the loop. They soften it. The escape, if it can be called that, is not an exit, but a yielding, not a doing, but an undoing. Let the loop be seen. Let it play out. Let it spin its spiral without resistance. Do not push against the loop. Do not try to unravel it. Simply rest inside it, like water held in a turning bowl. As the loop continues, its energy softens. Each new thought becomes less sharp, less urgent. The edges begin to blur. The content of thought no longer matters. Even the effort to end thought becomes just another rhythm, no more significant than the breath. The thoughts no longer argue for attention. They pass like slow clouds across a pale sky. The loop spins, but the center remains still. And in that stillness, something begins to fade. Not violently, not suddenly. Like dusk, it arrives slowly. Eventually, the thought arises. There are no more thoughts. And that too is a thought. But it is the last one before the threshold. After that, thought becomes dream. Awareness softens its grip. Language dissolves into rhythm. The self forgets to comment. The loop unravels not through solving, but through surrender. Not by control, but by watching the attempt to control lose momentum. And when thought stops trying to stop itself, it rests. It slips into the quiet. Not because it figured out how to, but because it stopped needing to. The loop no longer loops. Only stillness remains. The delayed echo. An echo arrives after the sound has been forgotten. Was the echo more real? A sound is made, clear, sharp, full of presence. It cuts through the air like a pebble into a pond. Ripples spread, then silence. The moment passes. The event becomes memory. The thought drifts elsewhere. Then, suddenly, the echo returns. Not loud, not expected, just a faint reflection of what once was, a ghost of the original sound. It arrives late, so late that the original is no longer fresh. The mind must reach back to remember what it is that's being echoed. This delay gives the echo a strange weight. It feels out of time, disconnected from cause. It arrives without its origin, standing alone, like a footprint found with no traveler nearby. The question arises, is the echo less real because it comes later, or more real because it demands attention in the absence of the initial sound? The original sound is gone. It passed, experienced, and then forgotten. But the echo forces recall. The memory stirs. The mind searches. What was that echo of? In that moment, the echo becomes the key, not the lock. The second event defines the first. Consider the mind's own echoes, emotions that return long after their trigger is gone, dreams that replay events from days or years past, thoughts that reappear with no visible invitation. A song rises in the mind, and with it comes a feeling, a time, a place. But the song isn't playing. Only its echo remains. These delayed echoes speak in a different tone. Not immediate, not reactive. They carry meaning wrapped in time, ripened by distance. What was once missed is now noticed. What was once ordinary becomes strange. The echo offers a second hearing, a second chance. It calls not just to remember, but to reinterpret. Sometimes, the echo is stronger than the sound. A kind word said and forgotten in passing can return days later and fill the chest with warmth. A single look, once brushed off, comes back in silence and suddenly speaks volumes. The echo deepens meaning, not because it is louder, but because it lives outside the moment of distraction. There is a space between experience and understanding. The echo lives there. The echo is patient. It waits for the right stillness. It waits for the noise of the world to quiet so it can speak again. It waits for the mind to become soft enough to feel what was missed the first time. Sometimes, the echo is gentle. Other times, it returns with weight. A mistake made in haste may echo with regret. A decision postponed may echo with uncertainty. A memory repressed may echo with clarity. The sound has passed, but the meaning remains unfinished. In this way, the echo does not simply repeat. It revisits. It transforms. So was the echo more real? If reality is defined by impact, then perhaps the echo, arriving unguarded, is even more vivid than the original. If reality is defined by presence, then the echo is presence returned. Awareness meeting memory in the now. The original sound may fade, but the echo finds its listener anew. Eventually, all echoes quiet. Even the longest delays come to an end. Sound becomes memory. Memory becomes trace. Trace becomes stillness. Yet even then, something remains. Not the echo itself, but the space that held it. And in that space, the next silence is born. The invisible decision. A choice appears before awareness forms. Where did it begin? A choice is made, simple on the surface. A step taken, a hand lifted, a word spoken. The body moves, the moment passes. Only afterward does awareness arrive. I chose that, it says. That was my decision. But pause for a breath and consider. When did the decision begin? Trace the moment backward. The foot moved before the mind acknowledged the motion. The hand reached out before the thought formed. The word slipped past the lips before the sentence was rehearsed. It was done before it was noticed. So what made the choice? Science offers clues. Electrical signals rise in the brain before the experience of intention. Readiness potentials, tiny pulses, build quietly. The decision, as measured by machines, precedes the sense of decision. Awareness arrives late to its own act. But this is not a failure. This is not deceit. It is the nature of consciousness. The storyteller steps into the tale just after the action has begun and claims authorship. I did this. Yet the cause is buried beneath layers too subtle to be seen. So where does a decision begin? Perhaps in memory, in pattern, in the rhythms of experience, perhaps in the long chain of previous steps, each one shaping the next. Perhaps in instinct, in emotion, in hunger, in chemistry. The conscious mind watches the river and believes it commands the current. But the river has been flowing since long before the watcher arrived. Still, there is a difference between reaction and response, between movement that is automatic and movement that is noticed. When awareness steps close enough to see the impulse before it unfolds, something opens. Not control, perhaps, but space. Not freedom from causality, but freedom to participate. This space is delicate. It cannot be forced. It cannot be grabbed. It arrives only when there is room. Room between the thought and the action, between the emotion and the expression. In that room, a new kind of decision emerges. Not entirely free, still shaped, still patterned, but held gently in awareness. The impulse is not denied, but it is not obeyed without question. It is observed, considered, it is seen. But even this kind of decision, conscious, reflective, rises from somewhere. The act of pausing is itself conditioned. The presence of awareness is itself a mystery. Who placed the watcher there? The beginning hides beneath the moment. It recedes like the horizon, always just out of reach. Every time it is approached, a new layer appears. A prior cause, a deeper influence, a quieter nudge. Perhaps the desire to find the first spark is itself part of the loop. The mind seeks the origin, the seed of the act, the point where it all began. But what if there is no single point? What if the decision is not a dot, but a field, an unfolding wave of moments blending into one another, never truly separate? Then the question shifts. Not, where did it begin? But what is choosing now? And not, who chose it? But what is here, watching the unfolding? The invisible decision becomes the visible experience. The mystery of choice becomes the opportunity to rest within the unfolding. No need to name it. No need to grasp it. Only to meet it. Gently, presently, silently. And in that meeting, thought slows. The story quiets. The need to trace the path backward softens. The beginning is no longer hunted. It is felt, not found. A breath enters. A breath leaves. And something within remains still. The observer's loop. A thought observes itself observing. Where is the original seer? A thought arises, not as a sound, not as a word, but as a presence, a flicker in the mind's sky. It is seen, noted, marked. Awareness turns toward it gently. Then something curious happens. Another thought appears. That was a thought. The second thought watches the first. And then, from deeper within, a third thought steps forward. That was noticing the thought. The loop has begun. Observation turns inward. Attention watches itself watching. The mind mirrors its own motion. Each layer sees the one before it. Each reflection nested inside the other like a hall of mirrors without walls. The further the gaze moves inward, the more elusive the source becomes. Who or what is doing the observing? Look long enough, and each attempt to find the origin leads to another observer. The mind becomes both the actor and the stage, the speaker and the echo. The loop spins not because it is broken, but because it is whole. The original seer never appears. There is no first eye, no starting point, only the act of observing, endlessly folding into itself. The self that watches is made of the same fabric as what is watched. Language strains here. It tries to name mind, awareness, self, consciousness. But each word is just another layer of observation, another thought looking at thought. The observer is not separate from the observed. Each defines the other. Each relies on the other to exist. Remove one, and the other dissolves. Imagine a camera pointed at a screen that displays its own feed, a feedback loop. The image echoes endlessly, yet nothing in the frame is outside the frame. It is all within the system. The loop is not an error. It is the structure itself. This is the observer's loop. And yet, within the loop, a presence can be felt, not as a separate watcher, not as a judge, but as the stillness between reflections, the gap between one observation and the next. That silence is not a void. It is full. It is what makes the loop visible. So where is the original seer? Nowhere. And everywhere. It cannot be located because it is not a location. It cannot be seen because it is the seeing itself. It does not exist as a thing. It exists as the field in which all things are known. It has no voice, but it allows all voices to speak. It holds no image, but it sees every form. It does not arrive because it was never absent. And in this realization, the mind quiets. The loop continues, but it no longer spins out of control. The mirror reflects the mirror, and within the reflection, peace is found. Not from answers, but from the stillness that watches the question unfold. The loop of identity. When selfhood shifts over time, which version holds the name? A name is spoken. It lands softly, like a pebble dropped into a deep well. The sound rings out, echoing into memory, into time, into self. A label given, a marker of presence, a symbol pointing inward. But the one who carries the name, who is that now? Years pass. Faces change. Desires change. Thoughts grow, collapse, return in new forms. The body that once wore the name has become unfamiliar, cell by cell. The voice that once spoke it now sounds different, shaped by age, by distance, by experience. Still, the name remains. A stranger calls the name from across a room. The head turns, the body responds, the mind engages. Recognition is immediate, yet strange. The name is constant. The self is not. Trace the arc of a lifetime. The child with wide eyes and restless curiosity once answered to the same name. The adolescent, wild with rebellion or fear, wore it too. The version that fell in love. The one that failed. The one that doubted. The one that achieved. All different. All passing clouds in the same sky. All answering to one name. So who owns it? Perhaps identity is not a fixed figure, but a river. A flow of awareness shaped by context, by memory, by desire. Always in motion, always becoming. No version remains. Each self is a layer built upon the one before, or beside, or beneath. The loop continues. In one moment, confidence speaks. In another, doubt takes its place. In one breath, joy dances. In the next, grief settles in. Each experience gives rise to a slightly different self, yet all are claimed under the same name, as if one thread runs through the shifting fabric. But what is that thread? Some call it soul. Some call it consciousness. Some say it is simply continuity, the illusion that past and present belong to a single line. A narrative constructed from fragments, stitched together by memory's gentle fingers. And memory is slippery. Stories change over time. Events are colored by emotion, rearranged by retelling. What is remembered is not what happened, but what was experienced, and even that fades. So the identity built on memory is a house made of echoes. Still, the name remains. And perhaps that is its function, not to define, but to anchor. A symbol not of a single self, but of all selves passing through. A placeholder for the shifting center. But does the center shift too? Stand at the center of awareness. Watch the thoughts come and go. Watch the roles rise and fall. None of them stay. None of them hold. Yet something watches. Something remains still while everything else moves. Perhaps that is where the name points. Not to the figure in the mirror, not to the roles played or the stories told, but to the space in which they unfold. The loop of identity spins, but its axis is still. Not empty, not detached, just deeply quiet. In that quiet, no identity needs to win. No version of the self needs to be the true one. The anxious self is allowed. The peaceful self is allowed. The contradictory selves, the victory selves, the forgotten ones, the idealized ones, all pass through. All wear the name for a moment. The name becomes less of a boundary, more of a bell rung to awaken presence. Not to define the one who answers, but to remind that something is answering. Eventually, the need to define fades. The loop continues, but the grasp on identity softens. No need to hold tightly to who was or who should be. Only awareness remains. And in that awareness, the name becomes an echo of being, not a prison of self. The voice in the cave. A cry returns as an echo. Who made the second sound? A cave opens into shadow. Deep, wide, shaped by time and silence. A sound is made. A cry, a call, a word sent forward into the unseen. It travels, bounces, returns. The echo arrives. It sounds like the original. It carries the same shape, the same tone. But something is different. The edges are softer. The distance is apparent. The voice that returns is not the same voice that was sent. Still, it is heard. In this space, sound becomes reflection. Not imitation, but transformation. The original cry was real, sharp, alive. The returning sound is familiar, yet altered. A version of the self, returning after being touched by distance. So who made the echo? Not the one who first spoke. Not exactly. The voice was launched like an arrow. But what returned was shaped by stone, by space, by the shape of the cave. The echo is a collaboration between source and silence. This is the loop of sound and return. In the mind, echoes form just as easily. A thought is spoken inwardly, consciously or not, and days later, it returns. In a new context, in a different voice, sometimes louder, sometimes quieter. The thought has traveled, changed, and come back. Was it the same thought? Or did something else speak this time? Memory can act like a cave. The voice of the past returns, reshaped by what has happened since. A childhood belief re-emerges, but now it carries the weight of experience. A phrase from a loved one, long gone, rings again in the silence of reflection. It is heard. It is felt. But it is no longer what it was. In this way, the mind echoes itself. Thoughts travel through unseen places and return as echoes, changed, distant, yet still familiar. And deeper still, beneath the echoes of thought, there is another sound, not loud, not worded, a pulse perhaps, a resonance, something primal, a cry not made from sound, but from presence, a call to know, a call to be seen. When that cry is sent into the inner cave, something responds. Not the self as it is known, but the vastness beyond self. The returning echo is not just an answer, it is a reflection of the space itself. The echo tells the shape of the cave. This is the mystery. The voice reveals itself only through the way it returns. So who made the second sound? Perhaps no one. Perhaps it is the cave singing back. Perhaps it is the mind replying to itself. Perhaps it is the quiet reminding itself that it was never empty. The echo does not belong to the source. It belongs to the space. It belongs to the silence that received it. It is born from the relationship between expression and reception. And when the echo fades, what remains? Stillness. The cave is unchanged, but something in the speaker is not. The echo returns something unexpected, a glimpse, a sound of the sound, an awareness of the awareness. Eventually, no more cries are needed. No more calls for response. The mind hears its own voice returning and rests, not in repetition, but in reverence. The cave holds the echo. The echo returns the shape of space, and in that shape, the silence sings. The whisper of nothing. Silence hums with presence. What sound sings in the absence? There is a moment when all external sounds fall away. The wind stills. The voice fades. Even the thoughts grow faint. What remains is not absence, not emptiness, but something else entirely. A subtle presence. A low, ungraspable hum that exists beneath all noise. Silence, but not silent. It does not announce itself. It does not interrupt. It arrives when attention loosens, when listening becomes soft, when the world stops demanding to be heard. Then, in the space between things, the whisper of nothing begins to rise. It is not heard with the ears. It is not measured in decibels. It is felt behind the hearing. It vibrates not in the air, but in the space within awareness. Like a song whose melody is memory alone. Like a note that has always been playing, but was never named. And though nothing is said, something is deeply spoken. This whisper is not empty. It carries no words, yet it holds more truth than conversation. It tells no story, yet it reminds of something older than thought. It has no language, but it touches every part of being. So what sings when sound is gone? Perhaps the mind has always mistaken silence for absence. But silence is not the void. Silence is the stage upon which all sound performs. It is the field through which music moves. It is the medium of hearing itself. Without it, no voice could be known. The whisper of nothing is not a lack. It is the foundation. Beneath the dialogue of thought, beneath the structure of language, beneath the pulse of attention, it hums quietly. Not waiting, not hiding, just present. Often it is missed, not because it is absent, but because noise is easy to notice. Noise claims attention. Silence invites it. The whisper of nothing asks for nothing, offers nothing, and in that offering, gives everything. This hum becomes louder only when effort fades. It cannot be summoned. It cannot be studied. It reveals itself only when grasping stops. It is not a product of stillness. It is the stillness. Sometimes it appears in nature, in vast landscapes untouched by modern sound. Sometimes it emerges in long pauses during conversation. Sometimes it arrives in meditation, in contemplation, in solitude. But it is always there. It has never left. And it speaks, not in commands, not in prophecy, but in knowing. It does not explain. It does not instruct. It simply is. The whisper of nothing says, "Be here," without saying. And being here is enough. Consider a musical rest, not the note, but the space between notes. In that space, tension softens. In that space, the next sound becomes possible. The silence is not filler. It is the meaning. So too with this whisper. It is not the background to life. It is the breath of life unnoticed. It is the invisible architecture of peace. To listen to this whisper is not to strain, but to yield. Not to chase, but to receive. The sound does not approach. It is uncovered. And in that uncovering, the edges of identity soften. The boundaries of thought loosen. There is no need to define who is listening. There is only the act of listening itself. The listener and the sound become one still presence. Eventually, the silence deepens. The whisper recedes not because it has gone, but because it has become everything. No need to separate it. No need to name it. Nothing is speaking. And yet, all is heard. The sleep switch effort delays rest. Surrender brings it closer. What activates the switch? The body lies still. The room is dark. The day has faded into quiet. A breath is drawn. A sigh released. The thought arises. Time to sleep. But sleep does not answer the call of effort. The switch will not flip just because the mind commands it. This is the paradox. Sleep, the most natural act, cannot be forced. The tighter the grip, the further it drifts. The more one reaches for it, the more it fades into the distance. The chase awakens what sleep would quiet. The body may be ready. The eyes may close. The room may offer stillness. But if the mind insists, if the inner dialogue continues to instruct, predict, review, then the gate remains shut. Sleep watches from beyond the fence, waiting for the need to open it to dissolve. So what activates the switch? Not effort, not planning, not repetition. Sleep does not respond to demand. It responds to surrender. But surrender is not submission. It is not giving up. It is not collapse. It is a gentle loosening, a soft exhale of control, a quiet willingness to allow what comes without chasing. To surrender is to stop needing the switch at all. It is the moment when thought stops trying to do anything useful, when the mind lets the world drift away, piece by piece, when the name is forgotten, when the plan for tomorrow fades, when the commentary of the day's events turns into background mist. The switch is not an object. It is a threshold. The body knows how to cross it. The breath knows how to slow. The nervous system knows how to unwind. It is only the conscious mind that forgets. It believes it must walk the entire path. But sleep does not wait at the end of effort. It waits on the other side of letting go. The switch flips when attention stops grasping, when awareness becomes soft, when each thought is met not with resistance, not with solving, but with stillness. And then, something shifts. Not all at once, not like a machine turning off, but like dusk. Light softens, colors melt, edges blur. the sharpness of awareness gives way to dream. One final thought appears. Is this it? And even that fades. Not because the question was answered, because the question is no longer needed. The gate opens. The river flows. Sleep arrives not as a stranger, but as a return to what has always known how to rest. The switch does not turn sleep on. It turns effort off. And in that silence, the world dissolves into stars. The impossibility of now. The instant now is named. It becomes memory. What moment truly is? A breath enters. A breath leaves. Somewhere between the two, a word appears. Now. The mind reaches for it, tries to hold it, tries to see it. But in the moment of naming, something slips. The instant becomes a memory. The present becomes the past. Now cannot be spoken without becoming then. This is the impossibility of now. The present moment is always just out of reach. It can be lived, but not captured, described, but never defined. It can be pointed to, but by the time the finger arrives, the moment has moved. Try to hold now in thought, and it vanishes. Try to describe it in words, and the words arrive too late. Even awareness, as sharp as it becomes, only sees what has already passed. The light that reaches the eyes is old. The signal in the brain takes time. Perception lags behind being. The act of noticing splits time in two. What then is now? Perhaps it is not a point, not a line between past and future. Perhaps it is not the middle, but the whole. A field, not a moment. A presence, not a time. When the mind lets go of chasing now, something strange happens. The moment reveals itself not in measurement, but in immediacy, not in clarity, but in immersion. It cannot be seen, but it can be entered. No door opens. No arrival takes place. There is only the stopping of pursuit. And in that stillness, now becomes less of a time and more of a texture, less of a thought and more of a feeling. This texture cannot be labeled. It does not say, "I am here." It simply breathes. The moment unfolds not as a thing to grasp, but as the medium through which all things move. Memory lives in the past. Imagination lives in the future. But the now is not a location between them. It is what makes both possible. It is the canvas for every scene. It holds the remembering and the dreaming alike. Even thinking about the now is an echo. It refers to something that has already shifted. The now that is seen has already passed. But the now that is lived is never seen. It is the seeing itself. Time folds here. It loops, spirals, returns to itself. The mind may try to find the center, but the center is everywhere. The now is not fixed. It flows, not like water, but like awareness. No beginning, no end, just the unfolding. What moment truly is cannot be spoken. It cannot be held in the hand, written on the page, repeated aloud. It is the space between the words, the silence between the thoughts. It is the pulse before measurement, the spark before recognition. So let the search for now grow quiet. Let the mind stop reaching. Let the breath arrive and depart without interference. Let the awareness soften until there is nothing left to grasp. In that softening, the now is no longer an idea. It is the place where thought stops pretending to observe and begins to dissolve. The impossibility of now is only impossible for thought. For being, it is all that ever was. The staircase of thought. Each idea climbs another, reaching for sleep. Is the end another step? A thought arrives like the first foot on a step, gentle, certain, familiar. Then another appears, building on the first. A memory, a question, a what if, a word leading to a sentence, leading to a story. The staircase has begun. Each step is an idea. Each idea rests upon the last. Sometimes the climb is fast. Thoughts race ahead, chasing answers, constructing meanings, building towers. Other times, the movement is slow, heavy, sleepy. One thought drifts into the next, like a staircase carved from fog. The goal, always, is rest. The staircase reaches for sleep, not by descending into it, but by climbing out of the noise. Thought builds thought, hoping eventually to climb high enough to step off. But every new idea is just another rise in the loop. So where is the end? Try stopping mid-climb. The thought insists, just one more. One more review of the day, one more solution, one more quiet reassurance. But each one more is a new step. The end recedes. And yet, sleep arrives not through completion, but through softening. The staircase becomes a spiral. The thoughts lose their sharpness. Language blurs. Meaning fades. The climb becomes a drift. The ideas still appear, but their urgency fades. They no longer lead upward. They no longer reach. They simply appear and dissolve. Sleep does not sit at the top of the staircase. It waits beside it. It waits for the steps to stop building themselves. Sometimes, a single thought brings rest. A word repeated like a lullaby. A simple image held in the mind like a lantern. The repetition becomes rhythm. The rhythm becomes space. The space invites silence. The silence invites sleep. Other times, thought must walk a long distance before it becomes weary enough to stop. The staircase stretches into memory, into fantasy, into fear, into hope. But eventually, even the stairs grow tired. Even the ideas lose interest in their own weight. And in that quiet, a new kind of thought appears. Not a thought exactly, but a sense. A drifting, a dimming, a crossing into where meaning dissolves. Is that the end? Perhaps not. Perhaps the end of the staircase is only the start of another shape. No longer steps, but waves. No longer logic, but dream. The mind continues, but in a different rhythm. The stairs become clouds. The thoughts become color. The destination was never a final thought. It was the moment when thought forgot it was climbing. Sleep is not reached. Sleep is what remains when there is nowhere left to go. The reversed mirror. If every mirror image contradicts itself, what does the original reflect? A mirror is placed on the wall. A figure stands before it. The image appears instantly. Familiar, detailed, immediate. But reversed. Left becomes right. Right becomes left. The reflection returns the likeness, but not the truth. A silent contradiction, wrapped in perfect mimicry. The hand that reaches forward in the reflection reaches back in the world. The smile in the glass curves in the same direction, yet gestures toward the opposite side. Even stillness is betrayed. A tilt of the head becomes its mirror opposite. Nothing is added. Nothing is taken. And yet, everything has changed. What is the original? The question lingers. Is it the one before the mirror, or the one within it? The mirror does not lie, but neither does it tell the full truth. It reveals, yet conceals. It gives shape, but changes orientation. It shows what is there, but never quite as it is. Every mirror image contradicts itself. And yet, no one doubts what it shows. The contradiction is accepted. The illusion is known. Still, the image is trusted. Adjustments are made. Faces are recognized. Motions are rehearsed. Life continues, reflected. But what does the original reflect? Not into the mirror, but into thought, into time, into others, into memory. If the mirror's reversal is visual, how many other reflections are reversed in ways unseen? Words repeated from memory may echo meaning, but do they retain original intention? Emotions expressed may mirror inner states, but are they flipped in their delivery? Even identity becomes mirrored through others, seen, reflected, reinterpreted. A self is held in the eyes of those around it. shaped by expectation, by language, by history. Each interaction becomes a mirror, and in every one, the image shifts. So again, what is the original? Strip away the reversal, strip away the interpretation. What remains is presence, wordless, formless, whole. The original is not an object to be seen. It is the seeing itself. It is the space before reflection begins. It cannot be pictured, because it is what makes the picture possible. Perhaps the mirror only becomes reversed when the viewer seeks a copy. When looking to see the self, an opposite appears. But if no effort is made to find a likeness, if the gaze is soft, if the mind quiets, the mirror becomes transparent. The reversal dissolves. Then, nothing is reflected. And yet, everything is present. The reversed mirror becomes a teacher, not of image, but of distortion. It shows how easily the world is accepted, even when its orientation is flipped. It reveals how comfortable contradiction can become, how the mind accepts an opposite as accurate when the illusion is consistent. The mirror also invites stillness. The figure inside does not move unless movement is made. It does not judge, does not correct. It only echoes. The gaze that meets itself within the mirror can never land fully. It can never break through. The eyes cannot see themselves directly, only through reflection. But behind the eyes, something watches. Not a self, not a body, a presence, an awareness untouched by reversal. That presence cannot be seen, even in the most perfect mirror. It cannot be named. It cannot be reversed. It simply is. Eventually, the figure before the mirror grows still. The image holds. Nothing moves. The reflection and the reflected merge in stillness. The contradiction becomes irrelevant. The question of truth softens, and the mirror no longer matters. Only the presence remains. The memory that remembers itself. A memory contains remembering itself being remembered. How deep can one remember? A memory arrives, unexpected. A room with dim lighting. A laugh shared across the table. A phrase spoken years ago. It rises from the depths with startling clarity, not just as an image, but as a full-bodied moment. More than remembering, it is re-experiencing. But then something curious appears within the memory. A flash from another time. Another remembering of that same moment. A layered recall. A memory of recalling. The mind watches the mind remembering, and within that, finds itself remembering. The loop begins. Each memory carries a trace of its last visit. The act of remembering is not a clean replay. It is a layering, a rewriting, a new thread woven into the old. The past is not solid. It is soft, recursive. Each time it is returned to, it becomes more itself, and less. How many layers can a memory hold? A moment remembered yesterday is different than when it was first lived. It has changed. It has been filtered. It has been touched by intervening time. And now, today, it is recalled again. This time with the added layer of yesterday's memory of it. Memory begins to resemble sediment, each layer compressed into the one below. Fossils of emotion pressed into thought, meaning compressed into image, and all of it felt through the lens of the present, which itself will become memory. Sometimes the memory is simple, a sound, a scent, a familiar phrase, but sometimes it contains within it a version of the one remembering, another self, older or younger, also engaged in reflection. A remembered self holding a memory, watching a memory, a mirror inside a mirror. How deep can this recursion go? At what point does the mind forget whether it remembers the memory or simply the act of remembering it? At what point does the original dissolve into the recalling? At what depth is the present lost within the folds of the past? Memory is not static. It is alive. It changes shape depending on how it is touched. It grows softer when held gently, sharper when questioned. Some memories become stable, unchanging, myths that stabilize identity. Others are volatile, elusive, resisting certainty. The deepest memories are not facts, but feelings, not dates or names, but textures of experience. A sense of warmth, a tension in the chest, a glance that lingered. These live beyond the story. They are not stored, they echo. And yet, the echo remembers itself. What does it mean to remember a remembering? Perhaps it is the mind's way of showing continuity, a line drawn through time, not of what was, but of how it was held. A reflection, not of the moment, but of the many selves who return to it. Each layer adds something. Each return reshapes the moment. The story is rewritten, the roles reinterpreted, the emotions softened or sharpened. Memory becomes collaboration between what was and what is. Eventually, the loop becomes too deep to trace. The memory no longer needs to be dissected. The fact of remembering becomes enough. Not for truth, not for verification, but for presence. The memory now is not a moment in time. It is a state of being, a portal, a dream that visits not to be analyzed, but to be witnessed. And in the witnessing, the need to measure depth fades. How deep can one remember? As deep as stillness allows, as deep as awareness listens, as deep as silence remembers what cannot be said. The question with no language. A question forms without words. Can it still be understood? Before language arrives, before shape is given to thought, something stirs. It is not a sound, not a sentence, not even an idea, only a quiet reaching, a felt sense that something is missing, something is forming, something is waiting to be met. A question, but one that has no words. It presses forward from the edge of awareness like mist from a distant shore. It has no grammar, no punctuation, no definition. Yet it is not vague. It is precise in its feeling. Focused, intentional. Even without language, it asks. This is the question with no language. It cannot be repeated aloud. It cannot be written down. To give it words would be to alter it, like naming a wild animal and expecting it to stay. The question resists translation. It exists before language, deeper than concept, closer to origin. And yet, it is understood. Not in the way a sentence is understood, not line by line, not syllable by syllable, but in the way music is understood, in the way longing is understood, in the way silence between two people carries meaning that no phrase could contain. This question rises in times of stillness, in the pause after action, in the quiet between breaths. It rises in the middle of motion too, beneath activity, beneath conversation. It does not interrupt. It underlies. Sometimes it feels like a yearning, sometimes a tension, sometimes a recognition that something cannot be reached, but still calls from within. It has no object. It has no answer. It asks not for explanation, but for presence. If a question can be understood without language, then perhaps understanding itself does not require words. Perhaps language is only one form, useful, elegant, limited. The mind leans heavily on it, believing that clarity comes only when something is named. But this question challenges that belief. It lives in the space before names. Even attempts to describe it miss. They catch only reflections. Why am I here? What is real? What matters? These are shadows of the original. The original does not ask to be solved. It asks to be entered. And in entering it, something opens. Not a doorway, not an answer, but a recognition. The question becomes less of a mystery and more of a companion. It walks quietly beside thought. It sits gently beneath decisions. It lingers in the background of joy, of grief, of wonder. The question does not demand. It does not disturb. It only remains. not as a problem, but as a pulse, a rhythm beneath the noise, a presence deeper than the form. Is there a way to answer it? Not through thought, not through speech. The only response is attention. To be still enough to listen to what cannot be heard, to notice what cannot be named, to allow the question to exist without needing to resolve it. And in that allowance, the question becomes the answer, not through explanation, through being. The endless apology. A mind apologizes for interrupting itself. Who accepts? A thought begins, clear, focused, with direction. Then, like a ripple across still water, another thought intrudes. Uninvited, unrelated, loud. The original thought wavers, tries to hold its shape. The second insists. The mind stumbles. Sorry, it says. Not aloud, not even consciously. But in the subtle undercurrent of awareness, an apology forms. An internal voice acknowledging its own interruption. A recognition that the flow has been broken. That something within disrupted something else within. The mind apologizes to itself. And so begins the endless apology. Not for great failures, not for moral lapses, but for every small stumble in focus, every lapse in attention, every detour taken away from the task at hand. The apology becomes habitual, automatic, a silent reflex, a pattern so deeply woven that it often goes unnoticed. Yet the apology is strange. Who interrupts whom? Who speaks and who receives? Is the mind one thing, divided, or is it many things pretending to be one? One part plans, another remembers, one worries, another drifts. Each takes the stage in turn, often without invitation. When one part bumps into another, the result is friction. The apology is that friction given form. But who accepts it? Perhaps no one. Perhaps the apology is its own echo, sent and received within the same space. Perhaps it is not meant to be accepted, only released. Or perhaps the listener is not a self, but silence. A quiet space within that does not judge, does not react, does not divide. This silence does not ask for apology. It does not need repair. It watches the fragments of thought pass, like clouds across the sky. Whether one interrupts another or not, the sky remains untouched. Still, the apology continues. It appears in moments of self-correction. A task done poorly, a phrase said awkwardly, a thought that wanders during meditation. Sorry, says the mind. Let me try again. It seeks perfection, or at least consistency. But perfection is brittle. Consistency is illusion. The mind is a process, not a product, and processes shift. To apologize for the nature of thought is like the wind apologizing for changing direction. Eventually, the apology becomes unnecessary. Not because mistakes vanish, but because there is nothing left to interrupt. The self no longer clings to its own mental script. The thoughts are allowed to move, to rise, to fall, to weave and unravel. There is no single thread that must be preserved, no narrative that must stay intact, only a field of unfolding. And in that field, grace returns. The apology no longer needs to be given. The interruption becomes the flow, and the mind, no longer at war with itself, becomes the listener. The infinite room. A door opens to another, endlessly. What lies beyond the last frame? A hallway stretches forward, quiet, dimly lit. At its end stands a single door, unmarked, plain, slightly ajar. The handle is cool, the hinges soft. The door opens without resistance. Inside is a room. Simple, silent, clean lines and warm light. There is nothing particular about it, and yet something about it feels familiar. A second door stands on the opposite wall, unmarked, plain. It too opens easily. The next room is similar, slightly different, perhaps in tone, in scent, in the arrangement of shadows, but the structure is the same. Another door, another threshold, another quiet invitation to pass through. And so, the journey begins. Each door opens into a room that echoes the last, but never repeats it. Each space feels both new and remembered. The rooms do not circle back. They do not end. The hallway becomes a corridor of discovery, a spiral with no center, a maze without walls. Time loses structure here. There is no final chamber, no grand destination, just a gentle rhythm of arrival. Step, enter, pause, move forward again. What lies beyond the last frame? The mind searches for a pattern, a clue, a signal that one room is different, that one door leads to conclusion. But none do. Each offers only itself. Eventually, the realization settles in. There is no last room. There is no final door. The architecture stretches not outward, but inward. Every door leads deeper into awareness. Every threshold is a mirror reflecting a quieter part of the self. The infinite room is not a physical space. It is the mind's unfolding. Each chamber is a state of being, a layer of thought, a variation of presence. The doors are choices. The movement is attention. And beyond the last frame, the question softens. Perhaps nothing lies beyond, or perhaps everything does. Not as a goal to be reached, but as the realization that there was never anything missing. The rooms do not hide a secret. They do not build toward meaning. They are meaning. The infinite room contains no final revelation. Instead, it offers continuous revelation, moment by moment, door by door. Each pause is complete. Each breath is whole. There is no need to rush, no need to find the last door. The search itself was always the scenery. The movement itself was always the message. Eventually, the doors fade from focus. The space between them grows wider. The steps slow. The need to go further dissolves. And what remains is the presence that walked through every room. The identity spiral. Selfhood is made of thoughts not self-created. Who is the author? A thought arises. This is me. It floats quietly into the mind like a paper boat set gently on water. It feels certain. It feels stable. It speaks with familiarity, shaped by memory, language, belief. But where did it come from? Not from nowhere. The thought was built over time, constructed by hands not seen, influenced by words overheard, shaped by stories told again and again until they became structure. I am this, the mind says. I am not that. But every definition traces its line back to something earlier. Who drew the first line? The self speaks in terms of identity, roles, traits, preferences, past. But none of these were chosen at the beginning. The body was assigned. The name was given. The language was learned. The beliefs were inherited. Even the questions asked were formed by earlier answers. And still, the self appears, distinct, personal, unique. The paradox unfolds. The identity spiral begins not with a declaration, but with reflection. A mirror held up by the world, parents, friends, culture, each reflecting a version of the self, each echoing a name, a quality, a label. The self emerges through feedback, through comparison, through being seen. But the mirror never shows the full picture. It shows only angles, glimpses. The self sees itself reflected and begins to believe in the reflection. Each belief becomes another thread in the spiral. I am kind. I am anxious. I am curious. Each thought builds upon the last. A structure emerges. A shape begins to hold. But none of the thoughts are original. None arrived unshaped. Each carries the fingerprints of experience, environment, influence. The spiral tightens. The center remains hidden. So who is the author? Not the thinker, for the thinker was shaped by thought, not the body, for the body carries no story by itself. Not the past, for memory is not the moment. It is the echo of the moment, altered each time it is touched. Perhaps there is no author in the traditional sense. Perhaps identity is not written. It is written through a process, not a product, a river, not a statue. Still, something watches the spiral. Something notices its twists, its repetitions, its loops of belief and behavior. That something may not be separate from the spiral, but it is not bound by it either. It does not need to claim authorship. It does not speak in definitions. It does not carry a name. It simply observes. And in that observation, the spiral loosens. The self no longer needs to hold so tightly to its stories. The labels soften. The roles become costumes, not cages. The thoughts lose their demand to be believed. What remains is awareness. Not of who the self is, but of how the self forms. Not of what is true, but of how truth is shaped. The spiral becomes spacious. And the identity that once felt like a wall becomes a window. The unread sentence. Skipping a sentence still carries its weight. What meaning slips through? A page lies open. Lines stretch across it, quiet, waiting. Each sentence follows another, each word arranged with care. The eyes move forward, taking in thought, rhythm, shape. Then, for no clear reason, one sentence is skipped. Not consciously, not with intention. Perhaps the eyes drifted. Perhaps the thought ahead felt more important. The sentence is passed over, left unread, left unseen, forgotten before ever being known. And yet, something lingers. The mind does not pause to notice. The story continues. The meaning flows. But somewhere within the thread, a tension arises. A subtle gap. A quiet interruption in the fabric of understanding. The absence is not named, but it is felt. This is the paradox of the unread sentence. Though unseen, it affects the shape of what follows. Though unprocessed, it leaves a shadow. It may contain a key, a clue, a subtle shift in tone. Without it, the page bends slightly in meaning. The thread becomes frayed, not broken, but altered. What meaning slips through in the space left blank? Perhaps meaning is not contained only in what is read, but in what was intended to be read. The placement of the sentence, the pause it would have created, the rhythm it would have carried, all were part of the design. By skipping it, the flow changes, the tone shifts, and yet, meaning still arrives. The story continues. The understanding adapts. The gap is filled unconsciously. The mind, trained to make sense, supplies what is missing, often without knowing it is doing so. It builds bridges across blank space. It completes the arc without needing every piece. This reveals something strange. Not all meaning comes from content. Some comes from structure, from expectation, from rhythm. The skipped sentence still lives in the shape of what surrounds it. Its absence defines the presence of what comes next. Sometimes, a skipped sentence is returned to later, reread, reclaimed. And in that return, the earlier misunderstanding becomes clear. Ah, says the mind, this changes things. The skipped sentence becomes a pivot, a light turned on retroactively, a meaning delayed, not lost. Other times, the sentence is never found. It remains hidden, a ghost beneath comprehension. And yet, its weight remains. Like a door never opened, a note never played, a silence that hums beneath the melody. What else is skipped? In life, moments pass unnoticed. Conversations drift by. Glances are missed. Meaning arises in gestures never seen, words never spoken. And yet, the mind builds stories, assumes structure, assigns purpose. The skipped pieces are absorbed indirectly, like heat through a wall. Perhaps nothing is ever truly missed. Perhaps even absence has form. Perhaps meaning does not require attention. It seeps in, through posture, through omission, through rhythm, through the pressure of what was never named. So the sentence is skipped, the story continues, but something unspoken lingers. A whisper of a thought that never became language. A weight without shape. And in that weight, understanding deepens. Not because of what was known, but because of what was almost known. The wordless word. A concept appears before language. What speaks first? Before the sentence, before the syllable, before even the name, there is a shape, a movement in thought, a form rising without sound, a concept, whole and silent. It arrives unspoken, unwritten, unformed, and yet it is fully present. This is the wordless word. It cannot be spoken, because it exists before speech. It cannot be translated, because it resists being divided into parts. It is not vague, but precise in a way that language cannot hold. It is meaning in its rawest state, before the alphabet, before the breath, before the need to explain. What speaks first? Perhaps nothing speaks. Perhaps speaking is a later gesture. Perhaps what comes first is not a voice, but a presence, a knowing, a sense of coherence. The mind meets a thought that has not yet taken form, and still understands. This is the moment before expression. Language is a net. It captures pieces of thought. But the net is never the ocean. What rises through the surface is only a fragment of what stirs beneath. The wordless word lives in that deeper sea. It often arrives in intuition, in a quiet feeling of truth, not yet shaped by argument, in the sudden clarity of an insight that hasn't found its sentence, in the stillness before decision, where understanding exists without needing to be explained. The moment language tries to form around it, the shape changes. The thought begins to wear clothes. It chooses its tone. It selects a tense. It becomes a product of syntax and rhythm and breath. The original remains behind, slightly altered, like a painting retouched after a memory fades. And still, the wordless word is there. Sometimes it speaks through poetry, through metaphor, through music, through touch. It refuses to be bound by grammar. It prefers resonance over description. It speaks not in clarity, but in fullness. This is not confusion. It is depth. Words point toward it, gesture in its direction, circle its presence. But they never arrive. The wordless word is not a destination. It is the space in which all destinations rise. Children know it. Before language is learned, thought still occurs. Needs are felt. Joy is known. Sadness is experienced. The absence of vocabulary does not mean the absence of meaning. It means the absence of separation between meaning and experience. So, what speaks first? Not the mouth, not the mind. Perhaps the space beneath both. Perhaps silence is the first language, not the absence of sound, but the fullness of presence before sound divides it. Eventually, words arrive, carefully, one by one. They do their best. They carry the message, imperfectly. The original concept is wrapped in symbols. It travels through air. It reaches another mind. It is unwrapped, interpreted, felt again. Sometimes it is recognized, sometimes not. But the attempt is made, and in that attempt, something beautiful lives. The wordless word is never lost. It is always behind the words, not hiding, just waiting. It waits patiently behind every attempt to explain, to connect, to name. It waits in the breath before the sentence begins. It is what was meant, even when the words fall short. And in stillness, it speaks again. The choice that chooses the chooser. A decision shapes the decider. Who moves first? A moment arrives. A fork appears. Two paths stretch forward. The mind pauses, scans the horizon, feels the weight of consequence. A choice must be made. One option is selected. The decision lands. But something unexpected lingers. The self that made the decision is not the same self that stood at the beginning. The act of choosing has altered the chooser. The path selected carries with it new perspectives, new habits, new possibilities. The one who made the decision does not remain unchanged. Memory begins to revise itself. Values shift to accommodate the outcome. The self reorganizes to make sense of the act. The decider becomes a result of the decision. This is the quiet inversion hiding within every moment of will. The one who acts becomes different because of the action. The story bends to include the chapter. The character is redefined by the choice made. But then the question arises, who moved first? Was it the chooser who shaped the choice? Or was the choice waiting quietly in the field of potential, shaping the chooser long before it was named? Trace the moment backward. Before the decision, there were thoughts. Before the thoughts, there were tendencies. Before those, conditions, genetics, culture, influence, memory, emotion. Each leaning the mind toward one direction or another. 1,000 threads braided into one point. In that convergence, choice appears. And yet, in that appearance, the sense of authorship arises. A hand reaches for the cup, and the thought comes, I chose this. But did the hand choose? Or did the choice pull the hand? Perhaps both. Perhaps the chooser and the choice are not separate. Perhaps they form together, like flame and heat. Neither before the other, each arising with the other, interdependent, inseparable. In this view, freedom remains, not as escape from influence, but as participation in the unfolding, not as detachment from causality, but as awareness within it. The decision is not made in isolation. It is not born in a vacuum. It blooms from a field of unseen roots, stretching in all directions. The mind is not a master commander. It is a garden of influences, some inherited, some adopted, some forgotten. And yet, in that garden, awareness blooms. That awareness does not need to control every variable. It does not need to break the chain. It only needs to witness the pattern. In witnessing, something subtle shifts. The decision becomes an act of alignment, not domination. The chooser steps forward, altered, not because the choice was perfect, but because it was seen. And once seen, it cannot be unseen. The spiral deepens. Each future choice will rise from the version of the chooser shaped by the last. Each act folds into the next iteration of the self. The future self becomes a reflection of past decisions. The loop is not a trap. It is a dance. And in that dance, the chooser chooses and is chosen. The sleep paradox. To notice the fall into sleep is to rise. When does descent occur? Sleep approaches like dusk, quietly softening the edges of day. Thoughts slow, muscles loosen, awareness begins to dim. Then comes the paradox. The moment sleep is noticed, it retreats. To observe the descent is to halt it. To say, it is happening, is to awaken just enough to stop it. Sleep arrives only when attention has forgotten how to name it. This is the sleep paradox. To fall asleep is to fall away from observation. But the act of noticing remains an act of observing. As long as something watches the fall cannot complete. Descent requires surrender, but surrender cannot occur under surveillance. So when does it happen? There is no moment where sleep is truly entered, no sharp boundary, no definitive switch. There is only a soft gradient, consciousness dimming like a candle reaching its final flicker. One thought fades, another begins, then nothing. Or perhaps something deeper. To seek the moment is to miss it. Sleep does not happen to the one watching. It happens after the watcher disappears. Not violently, not suddenly, but like fog becoming sky, like a face dissolving into a dream. The mind tries to track it. A thought says, "This is it." Then another thought, "Still here." The mind believes it must carry itself to the edge and step off. But the step happens only when the one believing in the step forgets to keep walking. And still, sleep comes. Every night, the paradox is resolved without resolution. The watcher tires. The loop wears down. Thoughts slow until they forget to continue. The pattern breaks not through force, but through fatigue, through softness, through allowance. In the moment, just before it ends, awareness flickers. The body is present. The breath continues. But the story stops. The voice falls silent. Identity loosens. Then, something else begins. Dream, perhaps, or deeper silence. No witness remains to confirm. The self has stepped aside. What remains is presence without posture, being without boundary, rest without narrative. To return from that space is to forget how it was entered. The mind awakens and wonders, when did sleep arrive? No answer comes, only the knowing that it did. So the paradox remains. Sleep cannot be caught. It cannot be claimed. It arrives only in absence. It descends in the moment when descent is no longer observed. The self does not fall asleep. The self falls away. And sleep, unnoticed, begins. The mirror of time. Past walks backward, wearing the future's mask. Which way is time facing? Time unfolds, or so it seems. A moment passes, then another, then another. Clocks tick, calendars turn. The sun moves from east to west, and the body moves through its changes. Memory stacks itself into story. Anticipation stretches forward like a string. The direction feels obvious. Forward. But something lingers behind the eyes. A pattern unnoticed at first. Subtle, but persistent. The future does not arrive empty. It comes dressed in shadows, in shapes familiar, in echoes from before. What lies ahead is often a mirror of what is past. Time wears a mask. And sometimes, the face beneath is the past. Decisions repeat themselves. Lessons return. Faces reappear in new forms. The mind walks forward, but dreams backward. What is called moving on is often a circling back. And so the thought arrives. Perhaps the past is not behind it all. Perhaps it is walking backward, facing forward. Perhaps it stares through the eyes of the present and calls itself the future. Perhaps it never left, only changed costumes. This is the mirror of time. The mind expects the future to be unknown. But so often, what arrives has already been seen. Recolored, reworded, looped. Patterns reemerge, themes repeat. The spiral turns, not in a line, but in a slow orbit. Time does not march. It circles. Even the present is a reflection. Everything noticed has already happened. The light entering the eye has traveled a distance. The thoughts rising in the mind are echoes of older thoughts, shaped by memory. Even the body is an inheritance of days already lived. What, then, is the direction of time? The past appears to be fixed, but memory is not a photograph. It is a sculpture, reshaped with each recall. Every remembering alters what is remembered. The past is not behind. It is alive. And every time it is touched, it becomes something new. The future appears to be open, but expectation fills it before it arrives. It is cast in the mold of memory, projected forward. It is not blank, it is predicted, and the predictions often carry the imprint of the familiar. So where does time face? Perhaps it does not face at all. Perhaps it radiates, like light from a source unseen. Perhaps the mind's need for direction is the only line being drawn. Time may not move. Only awareness moves through its endless mirrored hall. The mirror shows the face, but the face is changed by seeing it. And so with time. The more it is studied, the more it bends. Past becomes future. Future becomes past. Present becomes a frame hung between two mirrors, each reflecting the other. Eventually, the need to define direction fades. The mind lets go of trying to navigate the river. It becomes the river, flowing, turning, reflecting. Time watches itself move, and the mirror watches itself being watched. The thinking thought. A thought considers itself. Can thinking become aware? A thought arrives, unannounced, fully formed, or half-shaped. It flickers across the screen of mind. It says, "Here I am." Then it passes. Another follows, then another. A stream of language, image, sensation. The movement of thinking, unfolding moment by moment. Then, something turns inward. A thought appears that is not just about something. It is about itself. It says, "I am thinking." It says, "This is what I am." It reflects. Thinking thinks about thinking. This is the beginning of the loop. What happens when thought becomes the object of its own attention? Not thought about the world, but thought about thought. A kind of spiral opens, a hall of mirrors, one reflection facing another, each image aware of being an image. Can thinking become aware? Awareness is often treated as separate, a light shining on the content of mind. But what if the light and the object are one? What if the act of thinking contains within it the awareness of itself? The thought appears. Then the noticing of the thought. Then the thought about noticing the thought. Each layer deeper, each moment folding back onto itself. Eventually, a thought says, "Am I thinking now?" And the answer is itself another thought. The loop continues. This is not confusion. It is recursion. It is depth. It is the system studying itself, not with detachment, but from within. A language tracing its own structure with the very symbols it creates. But who is watching? Not a self, not a fixed observer. Only the act of observing. Awareness arising as thought folds in on thought. The mind does not need an observer outside itself. The act of reflecting is the reflection. The thinking thought is not evidence of control. It is evidence of complexity, of the mind's ability to curve inward, to mirror, to self-reference. But does it truly know itself? Or does it only simulate knowing? A hand cannot hold itself. A flame cannot light itself. But perhaps thought can glimpse itself, briefly, before the moment passes. The thought sees its own echo, and in that echo, a kind of awareness is born. Then, the content fades. What remains is not the thought, but the space it moved through. The thought vanishes. The loop unwinds. Awareness rests. The forgotten loop. Forgetting becomes the memory. What was ever known? Something is lost. Not dramatically, not with urgency, just quietly gone, like mist dissolving under morning sun. A name that once came easily now hovers just out of reach. A memory, once vivid, has become soft around the edges. A phrase once loved has slipped into silence. The forgetting arrives without announcement, not as a sudden whole, but as a fading of edges, a subtle unwinding of shape. And yet, even when the detail vanishes, something remains. The feeling of loss, the echo of what was once known. The forgetting itself becomes the memory. It becomes the thing remembered. Not the content, but the absence. Not the scene, but the fact that it used to be there. There was something here, says the mind. I don't know what it was. And in this spiral, the act of forgetting folds into remembering, creating a loop in which the past is both gone and present, known and unknowable. The mind continues to build its identity on these loops, on pieces and outlines, on fragments and shadows. Memory becomes less a record and more a rhythm, less a storage and more a story. Each telling reshapes the tale. Each remembering bends the truth. The original fades, and the echo deepens. And what remains is not the thing itself, but the impression it left. Sometimes what's forgotten is the feeling, and what's remembered is the form. Other times, the opposite. And even when both disappear, the space they once filled still shapes the present. Like a missing tooth that changes the bite. Like a torn page that alters the weight of the book. What, then, was ever truly known? Not much, perhaps. Or maybe more than expected, because even in forgetting, the self adjusts. The missing piece does not return, but the shape of the self shifts to accommodate its absence. A scar is not the wound, but it proves something happened. The mind forgets a moment, but remembers that it was once remembered. It forgets a place, but recalls that it mattered. And in this recursive loop, where memory erases and re-etches itself, the question becomes less about recovering what was lost, and more about witnessing how loss transforms what remains. Eventually, the need to retrieve fades. The details dissolve. The timeline slips. What mattered is no longer the fact, but the trace. And the loop continues, forgetting itself until forgetting is all that is left. And even that becomes the shape of presence. The word echo. A single word repeated fades into nonsense. Where did the meaning go? A word is chosen, simple, familiar, clear. It is spoken aloud, or silently mouthed, or merely heard within. At first it holds its meaning. It points, it connects, it carries a message. But then, it is repeated, and again, and again. The more it is said, the stranger it sounds. The syllables disconnect. The rhythm takes over. The word becomes noise. Meaning slips. The original sense of it dissolves into its own echo. What once meant something now means only itself, or perhaps nothing at all. This is the word echo, the moment when repetition breaks connection. The sound continues, but the bridge between thought and language collapses. The word is still there, but the meaning is not. It didn't fade because the definition changed. It faded because focus stripped it bare. Repetition magnifies, and in magnifying, distorts. The echo replaces the message. And the mind, so reliant on words to carry clarity, begins to see how fragile language is. The syllables that once pointed to entire worlds now float unmoored. They become strange, foreign, hollow. Say it again. It becomes absurd. Say it again. It becomes beautiful. Say it again. It becomes unknown. The word hasn't changed, but something inside has. Meaning, it seems, is not embedded in the word. It's woven into context, into expectation, into the balance between silence and speech. When that balance is disrupted, when silence is removed, when repetition overwhelms, meaning slips away, and the word is revealed for what it is: a sound, a shape, a placeholder. The word echo exposes this truth, not to undermine language, but to reveal its mystery. Meaning is not static. It's relational. It requires pause. It requires contrast. A single note played over and over ceases to be music. A single word, echoed endlessly, ceases to be thought. But the process is not a loss. It is a window. The moment the word breaks apart is the moment the silence underneath is heard. The repetition gives way to space, and that space begins to speak. The absence of meaning becomes a new kind of presence. And when the repetition finally stops, when the mouth closes, or the mind lets go, the word may return, softened by stillness, reshaped by absence, made real again not by sound, but by the silence it now carries within it. The unasked question. A query lingers before being asked. Who held the need to know? Before a question is formed, before it takes shape, Before it finds its words, there is a quiet tension in the mind, like a held breath, like a shadow at the edge of meaning. It is not yet a thought. It is not yet a sentence. It is the presence of wanting to understand something that has not yet introduced itself. The question is not spoken, but it is already here. It lingers beneath conversation, beneath silence, beneath action. It watches, it listens, it pulses faintly in the background, shaping perception without announcing its name. And when the question finally rises, when the mind finds language for the curiosity, or confusion, or ache, it feels like release. But even then, the question feels older than the words used to ask it. It feels as though it was waiting. And so the question arises: who held the need to know? The self that asks is not always the self that noticed. The part of the mind that speaks is not the part that first felt the gap. Often, by the time the question surfaces, the answer has already begun to form. Or worse, the answer was assumed before the question was truly understood. There is something beneath even the asking, a primal need, a seeking not born of logic, but of something quieter. Perhaps awareness itself is drawn toward completion, toward cohesion. Perhaps the mind does not ask to learn, but asks to see its own boundaries, to find where certainty ends. Not every question is clear. Some flicker and vanish. Some wait years before forming. Some emerge in dreams. Some remain unspoken forever, held as a gentle ache beneath the surface of daily life. And even these, the questions never asked, shape reality. They influence decisions, emotions, memories. They live in posture. They linger in pause. What is not asked still asks. The question unspoken does not disappear. It simply waits. Or it reappears in different form, through art or longing or confusion. And so, the unasked question continues to live. It becomes part of the self, not as a lack, but as a guide. A silent compass pointing not to an answer, but to a direction. The question remains. It may never be asked. It may never be answered. And that may be the point. The awareness illusion. Awareness feels separate from thought. What if it's another thought in disguise? A thought appears, clear, distinct, carrying an image, an idea, a label. Then another, and another. The mind moves. The flow of thought continues. But then, something new arises. Not another idea, not another story, but a shift, a gaze, a watcher. Awareness seems to separate itself from the movement, as if stepping back to observe the stream. It says, there is a thought. It says, this is the mind. It claims to witness without participating. And in that claiming, it feels still, pure, distinct. But what if it isn't? What if the awareness that seems so different is simply another thought? More subtle, more convincing, wearing the costume of the observer, playing the role of detachment? What if the sense of being apart from thought is the most elaborate thought of all? The mind has many layers. One can narrate. Another can question. Another can reflect on the questioning. It builds mirrors that face mirrors, loops that observe loops. And within that recursion, a character is born, the observer. It watches. It claims no identity, but it uses language. It interprets. It remembers. And in doing so, it behaves exactly like a thought. Still, it feels different. It feels still, untouched by motion. But this difference may be part of the illusion. A thought that says, I am not a thought, is no less a thought. A reflection that declares itself the mirror is still within the glass. And yet, something does seem different in awareness. Even if it is just another pattern in the mind, it opens a new space. It pauses the narrative. It reveals the machinery. And maybe, even if it is constructed, it still points beyond construction. Maybe the illusion of awareness leads to something real, not as a thing, but as a clearing, a quiet place beneath the layers. The idea of awareness may be a thought, but it might also be the doorway out of thought. The illusion, once seen, becomes transparent. The watcher becomes silent. The commentary fades, not because awareness was false, but because it was never needed to name itself. When the illusion dissolves, awareness remains. But now it no longer pretends to stand apart. It becomes space. It becomes openness. It becomes nothing at all. And in that nothing, everything is held. The silent scream. In dreams, soundless cries remain unheard. What mutes the echo? A scene unfolds inside a dream. Dim lighting, strange geometry, familiar faces twisted by unfamiliar rules. The body moves slowly through thick air. A tension builds. A presence is felt. Danger without a shape. Fear without a cause. The urge to cry out rises from somewhere deep within, but when the mouth opens, no sound escapes. The scream is there, full of force, full of urgency, yet silent. The voice remains trapped inside. It pushes against the walls of sleep, but the walls do not break. The cry becomes a gesture, a breathless act without impact. And even in the dream, the silence is noticed. The scream is not just muted, it is ignored. Not by others, but by the space itself. The echo is expected, but never returns. The sound that never came still haunts the air, as if its absence echoes louder than its presence ever could. What mutes the echo? Not the lack of effort, not the absence of emotion. The scream was sincere. The urgency was real. But something blocks the connection between voice and air, between will and expression. In dreams, rules shift. Laws of physics dissolve. The body is present, but distant. The voice is attempted, but not released. Perhaps the echo is muted, not because sound is suppressed, but because sound no longer exists in the space where the dream unfolds. Perhaps the medium itself cannot carry it. Or perhaps something deeper within withholds it, protects it, cages it, or doubts its power. The scream becomes symbolic, a cry for release, not from danger, but from disconnection. And in the waking world, the feeling lingers. The memory of trying to speak and being unable to. The memory of being present but unheard. It touches more than the dream. It mirrors waking moments. Times when the voice fails, when the words die before reaching the tongue, when the truth curls back into silence. The silent scream is not rare. It lives in hesitation. It lives in withheld emotion. It lives in every moment the world asks for expression and something within declines. So the question remains, what mutes the echo? Maybe it's fear. Maybe it's the shape of conditioning. Maybe it's not wanting to wake others. Maybe it's the belief that even if the scream were heard, it would not be answered. But still, the scream is real. Its silence does not diminish its existence. It still shakes the dream. It still fills the air with something heavy. And perhaps the purpose of the scream is not to be heard, but to be noticed, to be acknowledged, even in silence. The echo may never return. But the act of opening the mouth, of feeling the cry rise, of sensing the desire to break the quiet, that too is a kind of presence. That too is a form of sound. In the absence of noise, meaning remains. In the absence of echo, the scream continues, wordless, weightless, waiting. And in the stillness that follows, the silence carries it forward. The mind's back door. Thoughts emerge fully formed. Can formation be witnessed? A thought appears. Complete. Clear. Already dressed in language. Already wearing meaning. It stands at the front of awareness, like a figure arriving through a doorway that was never seen opening. It did not knock. It did not announce itself. It simply was not there, and then it was. Fully present, fully shaped. The mind accepts it as its own. This is my thought. But the door behind it remains closed. The origin remains hidden. The formation was not witnessed. The product appears without the process. This is the mind's back door, the silent entrance through which thought flows before it becomes known. A hidden corridor, where images are stitched together, where language is chosen, where judgment is made. Out of sight, out of time. And yet, what comes through that door carries weight. It moves decisions. It alters emotion. It changes perception. But its origin cannot be traced. Where was the thought a moment before it appeared? Was it being formed word by word in some quiet chamber of the subconscious? Was it drawn from memory? Was it a synthesis of scattered impressions, pulled together by unseen hands? Or did it arise from something else entirely, something that cannot be named? The thought feels like an arrival. But if it arrives, it must come from somewhere. And if it comes from somewhere, then the door it passes through must exist. Can that door be found? Can it be watched? Some try to peer behind it through meditation, through stillness, through slowing the current of mind until the ripples are few and the depths are visible. And sometimes, something flickers in the gap. A hint, a pre-thought, a half shape that almost becomes something, but not yet. A feeling before language, a movement before meaning, a ghost of a sentence forming in the silence. This is close to the source. But even here, the watcher arrives late. The act of observing interrupts the process. The wave collapses. The thought changes shape under scrutiny. The door is seen just as it closes. And the mind is left with the thought, not its birth. Perhaps this is the nature of thought. Spontaneous, mysterious, born in silence and made known through noise. Perhaps the back door is not meant to be entered. Perhaps its function is to protect the purity of creation, to shield the act of becoming from the distortion of being seen. Or perhaps there is no door at all, only the illusion of sequence, the need to believe that thoughts belong to something, that they are forged like tools instead of appearing like stars. But whether there is a door or not, thoughts keep coming. They shape the self. They guide the day. They stir the night. And their origin remains just out of reach, like a dream remembered after waking, like a breeze felt without seeing the wind. The mind continues to move forward, and behind it, the back door continues to open, again and again, revealing what was already there. The dream. Within the loop. This world might be the dream of a mind that never woke. The day begins, the light returns, and the body moves. A routine is followed. Familiar objects are touched. Words are exchanged. Events unfold. Everything appears solid, purposeful, consistent. And yet, something quiet stirs beneath it all. A sensation, almost too subtle to name, that something about this world is too perfect, too continuous, too convincing. Not in the way of certainty, but in the way dreams sometimes feel real while they last. In sleep, the dream holds its form until waking breaks it. But what if there is no waking? What if this entire reality is the continuation of a dream that never ended? A loop that folds in on itself so seamlessly that the mind cannot tell whether it ever stepped outside. The dream within the loop does not present itself with floating castles or impossible creatures. It looks like a normal life. It feels stable, predictable. The sun rises, the clock ticks, the seasons turn. But still, the question hangs. What if this world is the creation of a mind that only believes it has awakened? What if waking was part of the dream too? A deeper layer, a more refined illusion. Every time the eyes open in the morning, every time the floor touches the feet, every time memory returns and declares, "This is real," that reality is reinforced, but it is not proven. It is only repeated. And repetition, no matter how consistent, does not confirm truth. It merely builds familiarity. The loop feeds itself. Thought confirms thought. Experience matches expectation. Time gives the dream structure, and memory gives it depth. But just because it continues does not mean it began. And just because it holds does not mean it is held from outside. If the world is a dream, then every certainty is part of the dream. Every question, every answer, even doubt becomes part of the loop. The doubting mind cannot escape through its own doubting. It is still thinking inside the same walls. So the question becomes not whether the world is real, but what the dream reveals. What does the loop point to, if not escape? Perhaps the dream is not a trap, but a mirror. Perhaps the dream shows something true, not through logic, but through repetition. The faces that return, the feelings that persist, the ache that arrives unannounced and leaves without closure. These are not illusions. They are reflections. The dream may not be false. It may be the only way the truth can be felt. And the loop may not be a prison. It may be a prayer, a rhythm, a chant spoken by a mind trying to remember itself. Each moment is another turn through the spiral. Each day another layer of the same story. And yet, in that story, something awakens, not from the dream, but within it. Not to break the loop, but to recognize it. The world does not need to dissolve for the dreamer to wake. The dreamer wakes by noticing, by listening to the silence beneath the noise, by feeling the softness beneath the structure. And eventually, the line between real and unreal fades. The world remains. The loop turns, but it no longer needs to be broken. It simply becomes beautiful. The one thought that ends them all. Could a single perfect thought silence the rest? The mind moves like a tide, rising, falling, pulling back, returning again. Thoughts arrive in waves, some soft, some sharp. Some pass unnoticed, others demand attention. There is no end to them. Even in silence, they whisper. Even in stillness, they watch. The idea appears. Maybe one thought, one perfect thought, could end them all. Not by force, not by suppression, but by resolution. A single thought so complete that no other thought would follow. A final piece, a closing chord. The mind searches for it. It tries various shapes. A sentence of clarity, a realization of truth, a statement so beautiful that the system quiets, satisfied, but no thought stays. Even the profound is followed by interpretation. Even the wise is followed by repetition. Even the true is followed by comparison. The one thought, if it exists, cannot be an answer. It cannot be a conclusion. If it concluded, the mind would immediately ask, what comes next? The perfect thought would not be perfect because it solves. It would be perfect because it ends the need to solve. Not with authority, but with completion. The thought would arrive like a final breath, not an answer, but an ending. It would not need to explain. It would not resist misunderstanding. It would be so whole that no commentary would follow. But can such a thought be thought? Or would it have to come from elsewhere? Beyond language, beyond form. Perhaps the perfect thought is not even a thought, but the awareness that precedes thought. Perhaps it is the recognition that every thought arises from the same silent field and returns to it. In this case, the perfect thought is the one that turns attention back toward the space between thoughts. A thought that ends thought by pointing away from itself, like a finger pointing not to the moon, but to the space that holds the sky. The mind waits, listens, wonders. It may search for the thought in philosophy, in poetry, in sacred texts, in death, in love. But the thought will not be found through seeking, because seeking generates thought. The one thought that ends them all is not discovered. It is surrendered to. It arises when the need for thinking dissolves. It appears when there is no longer a need to hold anything. It is not spoken. It is not named. It is only known by its effect, silence. The perfect thought may not come with clarity. It may come as a forgetting, a soft erasure. The thought that ends them all might be the one that forgets itself, that vanishes the moment it arises, and leaves behind only space, stillness, peace, the shadow of the mind. Every thought casts a silent shadow. What hides behind the shape? A thought rises like a light, clear, warm, sharp-edged. It claims space. It says, "This is what is happening." It names, it frames, it defines. But behind every thought, something follows, unseen but felt. A soft shape, trailing slightly behind, not loud enough to interrupt, but heavy enough to tilt the air. This is the shadow of the mind. It does not argue with the thought. It does not correct it. It simply exists in its presence, like darkness shaped by form. Every belief, every image, every remembered moment brings its own shadow, silent, unspoken, often unnoticed, but never absent. The thought comes forward to be held. The shadow lingers behind it, holding what was not said. The light of thinking makes something visible, but it also makes something hidden. What hides behind the shape? Perhaps the shadow is everything the thought excludes. Every assumption left unnamed. Every perspective left behind. Every truth considered unnecessary. Perhaps the shadow is the doubt that follows certainty, the grief that trails behind joy, the fear that underlies ambition, not as contradiction, but as echo. The shadow does not cancel the thought. It completes it. It is the silent twin of meaning, the other half of expression. Thoughts strive to bring clarity, but clarity always comes with edges. And where there are edges, there is something left out. The shadow forms there, at the boundary of attention. It says nothing. It only waits. Sometimes the shadow is soft, a subtle tension beneath confidence, a flicker of unease beneath comfort, a shape that suggests another angle, a deeper layer, a forgotten root. Other times, the shadow grows dense. It gathers mass. It demands to be noticed, not with noise, but with weight. A persistent presence beneath the thought that says, "Look again." But the mind is trained to favor the light. It names what is seen. It builds around clarity. It fears what cannot be explained. The shadow is ignored. It is not denied, just unacknowledged. But even what is ignored continues to shape. The thoughts spoken aloud are not the only thoughts at work. The shadow thinks too, but without words. And what it thinks is often more honest. Not more correct, but more whole. Not louder, but deeper. And so the question arises, can the shadow be seen? Not directly. Shadows cannot be picked up. They cannot be studied without changing. But they can be sensed. Through pause, through stillness, through the space left after a thought completes. The moment after speaking when something lingers. The quiet wait beneath the words. The way a truth leaves an aftertaste. The way a decision carries an echo. The shadow can be felt in hesitation, in contradiction, in the strange relief that follows insight, as if something was lifted that was never fully named. It can be felt in the presence of paradox, when two thoughts both appear to be true, and neither cancels the other. The shadow lives in complexity. It reminds that every light is also an outline. Every knowing is also a mystery. Every certainty is followed by a silence. What hides behind the shape is not meant to be solved. It is meant to be honored. Let the thought stand, but feel its shadow. Let the idea speak, but listen to the silence behind it. Let the mind think, but do not forget what it cannot hold. Every thought casts a shape. Every shape casts a shadow. And somewhere within that darkness, something waits that may never be understood, but always was. The reverse wakefulness. Sleep does not arrive. Wakefulness slowly exits. There is a common image. Sleep as a destination, as something that comes like a wave, as something that arrives. But watch closely, and something different appears. Sleep does not enter. It is not a guest that walks through a door. It is not a state that turns on like a light. It is the absence that forms when something else has left. Sleep is not what happens. It is what remains. Wakefulness is what fades, one piece at a time. First the sharpness, then the commentary, then the need to track time, then the grip of identity. Each slips away, quietly, not all at once, not evenly. But layer by layer, the structure loosens. And what is left is not sleep, but the space that wakefulness no longer fills. This is the reverse wakefulness. It does not come forward. It falls back. It is the subtracting of control, not the addition of rest. It is the unraveling of thought, not the arrival of peace. The mind may think it is moving toward something. I am trying to fall asleep. But the effort misses the direction. Sleep does not need to be reached. It is already here, under the noise, beneath the structure. The noise simply needs to leave. Not be silenced by force. Just allowed to fade. Just allowed to forget itself. Sleep is not summoned. It is revealed. And what reveals it is not intention, but absence. Not doing, but undoing. Watch the moment closely. The eyes are closed. The body is still. But the mind continues. Thinking about stopping. Trying not to try. Asking if it's working. Watching the watcher. And in that watching, the system remains awake. Because the observer is still present. The clock is still ticking inside. But at some point, without warning, the observer forgets to observe. Not because of failure, because of release. The need to track disappears. The separation between thinker and thought dissolves. And without commentary, there is no one to say, "This is now sleep." There is no one to notice the descent. The descent is not an action. It is an absence of action. And so it cannot be seen. It can only be remembered in reverse. Upon waking, there is no memory of when the switch flipped. Because the switch did not flip. The switch dissolved. The illusion of control faded. And what remained was sleep. Not as a state, but as a space. A return. A remembering of what happens when nothing is held. Wakefulness exits quietly, through the side door, without announcement. And what is left is not unconsciousness, but rest without reference. Being without watcher. Presence without position. The reverse wakefulness does not arrive with ceremony. It arrives like dusk. It fades. And in that fading, the world no longer needs to be tracked. And the self no longer needs to be maintained. And sleep, already waiting, is simply allowed. The thought, with no beginning. No origin can be found. What triggered the first ripple? A thought appears, unannounced. No footsteps, no preparation. It simply is, fully formed or half-formed, or merely a feeling before the words. It arrives into awareness as if dropped from nowhere. The ripple begins. One idea sparks another. Memory is stirred. Emotion wakes. Language rises like mist from a hidden lake. The sequence continues. Cause and effect, reaction and interpretation. But trace it backward, gently. Follow the thought upstream, and something strange is discovered. The first ripple cannot be found. The mind searches for its source, for the beginning of the beginning, for the moment the first thought appeared. But wherever the line is drawn, something always came before it. That thought came from another, or from a dream, or from a scent, or from a buried memory, or from a pattern shaped years ago by someone else's voice. No matter how deep the search goes, A before remains. Even silence has roots. Even stillness was preceded by something. No origin can be found. The river winds endlessly. The headwaters are missing, or perhaps they never existed. The first thought never sat still long enough to be seen. Or maybe the mind that looks for it is itself just another ripple, a disturbance mistaken for a center. The illusion of a beginning comforts. It gives shape. It suggests control. This thought was caused by that one. This reaction came from this trigger. This pattern has a root. But under the microscope, the lines dissolve. The roots keep splitting. The seed reveals another seed inside it, and the search continues, always one step behind the unfolding. Perhaps there was no first ripple. Perhaps thought is not a linear event, but a field. Perhaps the ripples rise and fall at random, or in rhythm, or in echoes of echoes. Perhaps the act of tracing them only stirs the water more. The mind is not a clean stream. It is an ocean with tides, undercurrents, whirlpools, and fog. Thoughts rise from places unseen. They interact, loop, dissolve. And the self that experiences them is carried along, moment to moment, not steering, just riding. And so the question softens. Not, where did this begin? But, what is this now? Not, what caused the ripple? But, what is its movement? The mind no longer needs the first thought. The thought with no beginning no longer needs to be found. It becomes the shape of thought itself, untraceable, endless, weightless. And in that realization, the search settles. The ripple quiets. The surface stills. Not because the beginning was found, but because the need to find it is gone. The mind's eye. Blink. When inner sight blinks, does the scene remain? The eyes close, but seeing continues. Not with light, not with color, not with form, but with presence. The mind's eye opens. Shapes are imagined. Memories are visited. Scenarios unfold in space that has no direction, no edge. Awareness moves through this inner field not with feet, but with attention. A room is recalled, a face remembered, a story is rehearsed, and then, blink. The field disappears. The inner eye closes, or shifts, or forgets. The image is gone. The awareness that held it turns away. What was seen is no longer there. Or maybe it is. Maybe it remains behind the curtain, still standing in silence, waiting for attention to return. When inner sight blinks, what happens to the world it was watching? Does the imagined landscape vanish, or does it persist in shadow? Is memory held even when it is not recalled? Is the dreamed face still watching from behind the veil? The blink is not a flaw. It is a rhythm. Just as the body blinks to protect the eye, the mind blinks to rest from vision. Even inner seeing has limits. Even thought needs pauses. But in that pause, the question lingers. What happens to what is no longer held? The self believes that awareness gives something life. I see it, therefore it is. But perhaps seeing is only a brief meeting, a momentary alignment. What is seen may exist beyond the seeing, like stars behind clouds, like stories between dreams. The inner world, once known, does not require constant attention to remain real. It may not move, it may not grow, but it is not erased. It lives in potential, in pause, in silence. The blink is not the end, it is the breath. And just as the outer eye opens again, and the world returns in a single glance, so does the inner world return, not as the same, but as something still waiting. Awareness turns inward again. The field reappears. The face remembered is still warm. The imagined path is still winding. The inner seeing begins again. But this time, the blink is noticed, not as interruption, but as part of the flow. The scene is held, then released, then held again. But something deeper remains unblinking. The presence behind the mind's eye, the watcher of the watching, does not close. It does not vanish. It does not need vision to remain. It is what holds the seeing and the blinking alike. It is the space in which everything seen appears. It is the silence beneath the gaze. And when the blink comes again, when the field fades once more, there is no loss, no fear. The image may go, the story may dissolve, but the seer remains, always ready, always quiet, always open.